Chapter 646. After returning from Worldwide without any success, Ron Perlman was once again rejected by Warner. This was because Terry Semel, the CEO of Warner, was already in trouble and had no time to deal with Ron Perlman. With the continuous box office explosion of many big-budget movies, the total box office of the North American summer of 1994 was expected to exceed the $2 billion mark for the first time. In addition to the extremely dazzling Firefly Pictures, Universal, Paramount, and even MGM, which had been silent for many years, had a good harvest during this summer. Only Warner Brothers, which was firmly in the top position of market share a few years ago, had a bleak performance. On May 20th, the opening Western film of the summer, Mahuali the Gambler, had a good reputation, but because of the strong pressure from blockbusters such as The Mummy, Saving Private Ryan, and True Lies, the original $100 million box office estimate ended up with less than $60 million. Another Western film, The Law Enforcement General, which cost a lot of money, ended with a total box office of $25 million. Although the box office of The Ultimate Witness, released at the end of July, was expected to exceed $100 million, but during the entire summer, Time Warner's cumulative box office was less than $200 million. Their market share would fall below 10% for the first time, and even the first time in the past 5 years that the summer market share fell below 20%. In the face of such a serious decline in performance, Terry Semel, who had just sat on the CEO throne of Time Warner, instantly faced the joint criticism from shareholders and the board of directors. The competitors who lost the CEO position of Time Warner also began to stir. In this case, although Time Warner had enough strength to take Marvel from Firefly, Terry Semel, who had become very cautious in order to keep his position, did not dare to get involved in Marvel, a mess that required hundreds of millions of dollars of real money to solve. After that, Ron Perlman's request for a meeting with Paramount CEO, Shirley Lansing, didn't receive any response. 3 days passed quickly. Just as Ron Perlman was anxiously considering whether to return to his base in New York to seek support, or to test whether the major film companies that had close ties with Firefly were interested in cooperating, a personal call from Viacom CEO, Sam Leigh-Sherdong, gave Ron Perlman hope once again. Paramount headquarters on Melrose Avenue in Hollywood. Ron Perlman met Sam Leigh-Sherdong and the CEO of Paramount, Shirley Lansing, at the same time in an office. After exchanging pleasantries, they sat down on the sofa in the reception area. Before Ron Perlman could give his prepared speech, Sam Leigh-Sherdong said bluntly, "Ron, I've already learned about the recent events in detail. You wish to obtain the position of Firefly's director as a creditor, but you're in trouble because of Marvel's debt. Paramount can help you solve this problem. Everyone gets what they need. What do you think?" Ron Perlman, who had been a little smug, suddenly had a bad feeling. After Firefly expressed interest in Marvel, Ron Perlman had changed his original plan. He wanted to use the two chips of the creditors and all of Marvel to become both a director and a shareholder of Firefly Group. But now, these powerful potential partners seemed to only be willing to give him one choice. Sure enough, Sam Leigh-Sherdong did not wait for Ron Perlman to answer. He said again, "Paramount can buy Marvel and bear all of Marvel's debts. Then, you can fight for what you want without any burden. What do you think?" After running into a wall twice in a row, Ron Perlman gradually came to realize some of the facts. Since Ron Perlman was able to make $1 billion fortune from scratch on Wall Street, he certainly did not lack the decisiveness of a successful person. After quickly weighing the pros and cons, Ron Perlman realized that by giving up the burden of Marvel, Firefly would no longer have a bargaining chip to threaten him. With the support of Firefly's creditor alliance and Disney's animation department, he still had a high chance of obtaining the position of Firefly's director. The position of the director of the #1 media company in North America and even the world, or the position of a major shareholder of a comic company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. Almost any fool could tell which to choose. Ron Perlman quickly made a decision. He said, "Mr. Leigh-Sherdong, how much does Param intend to offer?" Sam Leigh-Sherdong said, $100 million. When Ron Perlman heard this price, he almost jumped up. $100 million? Are you kidding me? 6 years ago, when Ron Perlman bought Marvel, he spent $80 million. A few years ago, in order to give investors the illusion that Marvel was rapidly expanding so that they could issue bonds, Marvel had bought a few animation and toy companies. All these expenses added up to more than $100 million. Although Marvel was now facing the dilemma of a falling stock price and a debt crisis, its actual net worth was still more than $100 million. Sam Lei Sherdong's offer was no different from robbery. Forcefully suppressing the urge to slam the door and leave, Ron Perlman said with a trembling voice, "Mr. Lei Sherdong, don't you think this price is too insincere?" Lei Sherdong didn't seem to notice the change in Ron Perlman's expression. His attitude was still strong as he said, "This price is very reasonable. Although Marvel's current market value is indeed higher than this, after Viacom buys Marvel, if Marvel doesn't show its true value, Viacom will have to take on an additional debt of more than $500 million. This is a very risky deal." Ron Perlman retorted, "Eric Williams has already spent nearly $500 million in cash to buy Marvel. Isn't this enough to show Marvel's value?" Lei Sherdong sneered. "I only know that once Firefly controls Marvel, then you will have to obediently spit out the debt financing you swallowed from Marvel. At the same time, you will also face an investigation by the SEC, Federal Securities and Exchange Commission. Sell Marvel to Viacom, and I can promise not to pursue this matter." Ron Perlman fell silent. This was what he was most worried about. The SEC had the same bad habit as the IRS. Once they found a problem with a company's transaction, they would investigate all similar transactions in the past. Since Andrew Holdings was able to use Marvel to get hundreds of millions of dollars, it was easy to imagine the inside story of the past transactions. After all, if he didn't use these shady methods, Ron Perlman wouldn't have been able to get his current wealth. A few minutes later, Ron Perlman said, "I need to think about it." Lei Sherdong nodded and said, "Of course, no problem. Viacom is patient enough. However, your opponents are big companies like Firefly, Berkshire Hathaway, and State Street Global Fund. They won't give you too much time." Ron Perlman replied coldly, "I don't need Mr. Lei Sherdong to remind me of this." After leaving Paramount's office building, Ron Perlman stood in the bright sunshine of Los Angeles in August. He felt a slight chill all over his body. He suddenly missed Wall Street in the 1980s. Back then, Decong Securities was still at its peak. Malicious mergers and acquisitions were in full swing. He could get endless funds to attack cities by issuing junk bonds. However, all of this disappeared with a stock market crash at the end of the 1980s. Decong Securities collapsed, the junk bond market shrank, and his rapidly expanding business came to an abrupt end. Back then, even the heads of the megacorporations had to be careful when they heard his name. Now, he had to be ignored or mocked by these despicable local tyrants of Hollywood. Recalling the golden age of the past, Ron Perlman quickly decided to return to New York, to Wall Street. Perhaps Wall Street was greedier than these local tyrants of Hollywood, but at least it was his territory, his stage. He could use the rules more skillfully. In Paramount's office building, Shirley Lansing stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the office and watched Ron Perlman leave in a hurry. She could not help but ask Lei Sherdong, who was beside her, "Do you think he will sell Marvel to us?" Lei Sherdong looked at the luxury car downstairs and said, "It's hard to say. However, if we can get it, it will play a very important role in the next step of Viacom's development." Shirley Lansing nodded in agreement. Viacom's internal department had held a special meeting regarding Marvel's matter. Marvel's current structure was like a mini Disney. Although it was very pocket-sized, the system included various departments such as film, television, music, comics, and toy peripherals that a comprehensive entertainment company needed. Of course, Viacom was not interested in the film and television departments of Marvel Entertainment. They still needed the superhero copyrights in Marvel's hands, but at the same time, they also needed the toy company in Marvel's hands. Firefly's Disney peripherals brought in hundreds of millions of dollars of stable profits every year. Almost any film company in Hollywood was very envious. The other major film companies had never stopped trying to enter this business, and Viacom was no exception. Since acquiring the Blockbuster video store chain, the senior executives of Viacom had proposed the idea of using Blockbuster's retail distribution system to develop Paramount Pictures movie peripherals. However, Viacom found that Paramount did not have many high-quality movies that could be used to develop their peripherals. For example, Jurassic Park and Toy Story, which had made Firefly a lot of money in recent years, did not have a single one of these movies that could be developed with rich peripherals. Therefore, when a series of topics around Firefly recently brought Marvel Entertainment into the sights of Hollywood, the senior executives of Viacom immediately discovered Marvel's potential. Marvel's popular comic characters and toy companies could provide rich content for Viacom's peripheral plans. Moreover, if they could use Marvel superheroes to develop a few movie series comparable to Warner's Batman, then Viacom could easily open up the entire industry chain from movies to toys. Lei Sherdong stood silently for a while before suddenly asking, "Shirley, have you seen what that little guy has been doing recently?" Shirley Lansing shook her head. "If it were me, I would definitely find a way to stabilize Disney's animation department and then deal with the pressure from creditors. Firefly has just merged with ABC and can still maintain a net profit of US $657 million for the first half of the year. Next, most of the summer, autumn TV series, and New Year movies are all concentrated in the second half of the year. What's more, the popular summer movies will bring explosive revenue in the videotape and peripheral markets at the end of the year. Firefly's profits will be even more generous in the second half of the year." With this kind of confidence, as long as Firefly stabilizes Disney's animation department, they don't have to worry about the pressure from creditors at all. But Eric Williams didn't do this at all. "It feels like..." Lei Sherdong continued Shirley Lansing's words and said, "Like he doesn't care about Disney's animation department at all, right?" Shirley Lansing nodded. Although we all know that Firefly's original plan is to shift Disney's animation to 3D animation production, after The Lion King, I believe that anyone with a little bit of rationality will not continue to adhere to the original strategy. Lei Sherdong said, "If that little guy really doesn't care, then we can take over Disney's animation department. I've already asked Peter to try this, and I'm sure that several other companies have also tried to poach people," Shirley Lansing replied. "But those people in Disney's animation department don't seem to have any intention of jumping ship. Obviously, Disney's platform is more suitable for them." And now, that little guy suddenly pointed his spear at Marvel. Lei Sherdong narrowed his eyes and suddenly had an idea in his mind. "Shirley, why don't we make the boldest assumption?" Shirley Lansing looked at the old man next to her in confusion. Lei Sherdong hesitated for a moment and continued, "Suppose that little guy still doesn't care about Disney's animation department, what do you think he will do next?" This assumption is very unreasonable. No one in Hollywood would not care about an animation department that can produce $1 billion in profits. Shirley Lansing subconsciously retorted, but then she said, "If this is really the case, Firefly is likely to give up on the transformation of Disney's animation department and directly cut off the entire department." Lei Sherdong's narrowed eyes suddenly opened. He said, "Shirley, contact the group's finance department immediately. I want to know how much cash Viacom has available now." Shirley Lansing instantly understood Lei Sherdong's intention. If the very unreasonable assumption just now was true, no matter what reason Firefly had for cutting off Disney's animation department, Viacom would have enough reason to win it over at all costs. A mature animation department would definitely be far more useful to Viacom's peripheral plans than Marvel, which had yet to show any potential. Chapter 647. The evening at the Pointy Corner Manor always allowed Eric to temporarily escape from the hustle and bustle of Hollywood. As long as he had time, Eric would sit by the glass wall of Freedom City at sunset. Sometimes, a book or a document would appear in his hand. Then, he would quietly watch the orange sunset slowly sink into the horizon until the evening lights were lit. Elizabeth once commented that Eric in such a scene was like an evil villain hiding in a corner in a movie. Chris, who had studied a little psychology, said that Eric lacked a sense of security because he was not sitting on the villa's seaside terrace with a wider view. Instead, he was separated by a thick glass wall, as if he was isolating the whole world from himself, as if he was afraid of being disturbed or hurt. Of course, Elizabeth's statement was just a joke. Chris's theory was completely irrelevant because other than Eric himself, no one could analyze the psychological activities of a transmigrator. Only Eric himself knew that this was a habit that he had developed unknowingly. Just like how everyone had their own unique habits, Eric thought to himself. Once again, Eric put down the proposal in his hand. He raised his head and looked at the sunset that was mostly submerged by the sea. Once again, he sorted out tomorrow's matters in his mind to make sure that he did not miss any details. As the headquarters of Hollywood, Ron Perlman's recent actions did not escape Firefly's eyes. Even Ron Perlman's contact with global studios and other film companies was within Firefly's expectations. After all, Marvel was an entertainment company. There were not many companies outside of Hollywood that were interested in Marvel. Marvel had now lost the potential for capital operations. Firefly and other companies had controlled 90% of Marvel's debt, and Wall Street would not rashly provoke this hot potato. Therefore, the only ones that could compete with Firefly were the major Hollywood film companies. Although it could be seen from Ron Perlman's hasty return to New York that he hadn't reached an agreement with any of the companies, Worldwide, Warner, or Paramount, Eric still didn't want any accidents to happen. If Ron Perlman was forced into a corner, it was inevitable that he wouldn't accept the harsh conditions offered by the other companies. Therefore, Eric planned to use an even fresher cabbage to attract the attention of the major Hollywood film companies. Eric tidied up the documents and placed them on the round table beside him. Just as he was about to get up and eat dinner, he heard footsteps behind him. Then, Drew, who was wearing a singlet and hot pants, jumped into Eric's arms from behind, shaking his two white legs. Eric smiled and pressed down on the girl who was rubbing against him. He asked, "Didn't you say that you were going to stay on the set of Night at the museum for a few days? Why did you come back early?" The little girl giggled as she rested her head on Eric's lap and said, "I was afraid that you would leave me behind and drive 10880 back to Pandora in advance, so I hurried back." Eric reached out and pinched the girl's face. He turned his head and greeted the twins who were each pulling a large suitcase. This action obviously displeased the girl in his arms. She tugged at Eric's shirt and asked coquettishly, "Eric, why are you home alone?" Eric turned his head and grabbed the restless little hand. "I was going to spend the night with a girl named Cyrus tonight, but you ruined it." "Cyrus?" The girl was stunned, but she soon understood what Eric meant by silence. She giggled and hugged Eric's neck. "Now that we have little Drew, we don't need Cyrus anymore. If Drew is not enough, we still have Natasha and..." "Natasha. Hee hee. By the way, I brought you a gift." Seeing the girl excitedly open her suitcase and take out a sky-blue tentacle that had been in the limelight in Men in Black, Eric shook his head and said with a smile, "You're too insincere. Did you pass by a Disney store on your way back and buy it at the last minute?" "Of course not." The girl leaned over and forced the sky-blue antenna on Eric's head. She retorted, "I bought it at the Disney store in New York." "Well, at least it was not at the Disney store in Malibu," Eric complained in his heart. He watched as the girl took out another pink antenna and put it on his head. Then, she excitedly came over and asked the twins to take pictures of them with their cameras. After patiently letting the girl do as she pleased, Eric took off the pair of weird antennae on his head and threw them aside. He asked, "You stayed in New York for so long. Did you go to Long Island to see Kevin and Shasha?" "Yes, I read bedtime stories to Shasha for several days." Eric laughed and said, "It must be another horror novel, right? Don't scare her all the time." "Of course not," Drew said with a grin. He ordered the twins to take his luggage to his bedroom. His eyes wandered for a while before he noticed a few records on the round table. He curiously picked one up and asked, "What's this?" Eric looked at the record in the girl's hand and pointed at the record player not far away. He said, "I prepared the background music for the Victoria's Secret show. Try it. You'll definitely like this song." Drew put the record into the machine. Before he walked over to Eric, a high-pitched female voice came out after a short prelude. "Oh, you broke my heart." It was only the first line, but the whole song's fierce momentum was faintly displayed. "Wow, I like this song," said the little girl who ran over to Eric. After the song with the rebellious lyrics finished playing, the little girl giggled again. "Eric, don't tell me this song was written by one of your ex-girlfriends?" Of course, Eric's only ex-girlfriend was Jennifer Aniston. Thinking about the girl he hadn't seen for a long time, Eric couldn't help but sigh in his heart. A few years had passed and the distance between them was getting farther and farther. Maybe they couldn't go back to the past. The girl must have realized this, so she didn't hesitate to mention Jennifer Aniston in front of him. Eric knocked on the girl's head and said, "I wrote it myself, can't I?" The girl laughed a few times and cleverly didn't continue the topic. She asked, "What's the name of the song?" "Take a guess." The girl tilted her head and remembered the 2 letters in the lyrics. She asked tentatively, "Foo?" Eric nodded and said, "Smart, but unfortunately, there's no reward." The girl immediately moved her face closer and said, "No, I want a reward, I want a reward." Eric kissed the white and tender baby face and said, "Okay, just once is enough, don't be too greedy." "Then can you give me this record?" Eric shook his head and said, "This is just a sample, and I don't think this singer's explosive power is enough. I'll give it to you when a better singer records it. But this song is still a secret, don't spread it around." "Okay." The girl nodded and looked at the remaining records on the table. She said, "These 2, let me listen. I haven't eaten dinner yet, help me prepare something to eat. You only know how to play, you don't know how to stay at home at all. Haha." After The Lion King, all the employees at the Disney Animation Studio headquarters in Burbank were full of excitement that lasted for a long time. The director of The Lion King, Roger Ailes, was even more so. Although all the projects in the animation department were suspended because of the original restructuring strategy, Roger Ailes, like many people, still came to his office early. After enjoying a cup of coffee, Roger Ailes was about to ask his assistant to find the materials of several hand-drawn animation projects that were in the incubation period in the department. He wanted to study which animation would be produced after reaching an agreement with the headquarters. However, he saw one of his employees barge in without knocking on the door. Roger Ailes frowned and asked with dissatisfaction, "Jim, what happened to make you lose your composure?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Ailes, but I seem to have seen the boss in the parking lot." "Boss?" Roger Ailes repeated and stood up abruptly. "You mean Eric Williams?" Jim nodded. "Yes, it seems that Mr. Michael Lynn is also there." Roger Ailes frowned and quickly felt that Eric might want to bypass Peter Schneider and Roy Disney and negotiate with them directly. However, in the previous secret meetings, the entire Disney animation department had reached an agreement to attack and defend. Roger Ailes was also very clear that only when everyone was united could they get more benefits from the parent company, so he quickly asked Jim, "Did Mr. Schneider and Mr. Disney come today?" Jim shook his head and said, "I don't know, I just arrived. After seeing the boss, I immediately came to tell you this." Roger Ailes nodded, but then said, "Go and see if Peter and Roy have arrived. If they haven't arrived, call them immediately." After explaining this matter, Roger Ailes hurriedly left the office. At this time, the entire Disney animation department had already known the news of Eric's personal arrival. Many people stood up from the open work cubicles and looked at the entrance. After hearing the news, several middle-level managers of the animation department also came out to welcome them. Peter Schneider and Roy Disney obviously didn't come to work. Eric and Michael Lynn walked in with a few attendants and saw Roger Ailes, who was pushed out to greet them. After shaking hands with him, Eric asked casually, "Where are Peter and Roy?" "Mr. Williams, they're on their way. They might be stuck in a traffic jam. They'll be here soon." Eric didn't expose Roger Ailes's lie and said, "Then let's go to the conference room first and call the heads of the other departments. If they're stuck in a traffic jam, call them." An hour later, Peter Schneider and Roy Disney, who were worried that Eric would bypass them and take the opportunity to negotiate with the employees, hurried over from home. When they appeared in the conference room of the animation department, they were sweating profusely. Eric, who was sitting leisurely at the head of the table, saw that most of the staff had arrived. He put down the Los Angeles Times in his hand and took the prepared documents from Kelly. He said to everyone, "Since everyone is here, let's start this meeting." Roy Disney spoke first. "Mr. Williams, I don't think this meeting is necessary at all. We've already stated our conditions. I think those are what everyone in the animation department should get. If the parent company can't meet them, the entire animation department, more than 700 employees, will fight to the end. Your conditions, those promotions and salary increases, or the introduction of a board of directors with creditors? Eric looked at Roy Disney mockingly. If it's the former, of course, it's very reasonable. But if it's the latter, do you know the consequences of introducing someone like Ron Perlman to the company's board of directors? Eric's gradually increasing tone made the hearts of all the animation department managers in the conference room sink. At the same time, they had a bad feeling. Without waiting for Roy Disney to answer, Eric immediately said, "You must know, because whether it's Revlon or Marvel's mistakes, they're all clearly there." In the 1980s, Ron Perlman maliciously acquired Revlon. After he got his hands on it, he immediately dismantled this thriving cosmetics company. In the end, this company, which had the potential to catch up with Estée Lauder, a world-class cosmetics company, is still the same as it was 10 years ago. How many people can still remember Revlon now? Look at Marvel. After Ron Perlman took over, the comic company, which used to be far more powerful than DC, was completely reduced to a capital operation tool. 2 years ago, the 7 chief writers of Marvel were dissatisfied with Ron Perlman's misdeeds and collectively left. Now, Marvel is only left with a mess of $553 million in debt. However, you want to bring a guy who only knows how to gnaw on the company's flesh and blood like a termite into the Firefly board of directors. Other than satisfying some people's selfish desires, I can't think of any other purpose. Eric's tone became angrier and angrier. He even unconsciously raised the coffee cup next to him and almost threw it out subconsciously. He inadvertently glanced at a female employee sitting at the end of the conference table. She closed her eyes in horror and wanted to hide but didn't dare to. He immediately restrained himself and put the cup back on the table. After calming down, Eric flipped open the documents in front of him and said, "Now that things have come to this, let's part on good terms. Now, let's discuss the matter of changing the animation department's boss." Although Eric's words just now made the animation department managers in the conference room feel a little guilty, when they heard Eric's last sentence, they still subconsciously wondered if they had heard wrong. More than 10 animation department managers, including Peter Schneider and Roy Disney, looked at each other and realized that they didn't hear wrong. Eric really did say something. However, the same thought appeared in everyone's mind. How is this possible? *P.S. There's one more chapter later. Star. Chapter 648. Amidst the silence, the director of The Lion King, Roger Ailes, was still unwilling to give up and asked, "Mr. Williams, did you really say that you want to change the boss of Disney's animation department?" "Not Disney's animation department," Eric emphasized the word Disney, and said, "To be more precise, I plan to sell the entire hand-drawn animation department. The Disney brand belongs to Firefly. No one can take it away." Amidst the silence again, Peter Schneider suddenly felt a strong sense of crisis. If Eric didn't even care about Disney's animation department, then what was the point of what he and Roy Disney had done before? More importantly, if they lost Disney's animation department, the two of them, the worry in his heart gradually turned into fear. Peter Schneider suddenly stood up from his seat, pointed at Eric and shouted, "No, you won't, Eric Williams. You will never sell Disney's animation department. You're just trying to force us to give in. We will never give in, never." Eric looked at the hysterical Peter Schneider expressionlessly and said to the female assistant beside him, "Kelly, go and call security." Kelly glanced at Peter Schneider, got up, and walked out of the meeting room. After Kelly left, Eric said to Peter Schneider, "Either sit down and continue this meeting, or get out, or I'll get security to throw you out." Peter Schneider's expression was extremely ugly. He gritted his teeth, and after a few seconds of stalemate, he sat down dejectedly. Compared to Peter Schneider's loss of composure, Roy Disney was even more shocked. However, Roy Disney, who thought that he was used to storms, knew that he had to be calm at times like this. He also felt that Eric might just be bluffing to force the animation department to give in. After thinking for a while, Roy Disney asked, "Mr. Williams, do you think Disney can still be considered Disney without its animation department?" Eric suddenly sighed. After such a long time, these people still couldn't figure out what he was thinking. Disney will always have an animation department. It's just that they won't use hand-drawn animation to produce animated movies anymore. Moreover, Disney will keep several animation studios in Canada, Australia, and other countries, and continue to provide animation for the Disney Channel. However, Disney's animated movies will be fully converted to 3D digital production. When Roy Disney heard Eric's plan in a calm tone, his heart skipped a beat. On the surface, he still calmed down and motioned to more than a dozen people in the meeting room. He said, "So, you're planning to package and sell all of us, more than 700 people in the hand-drawn animation department. Hee, even if you don't plan to keep the department, do you think we'll be willing to let you sell us off as a bargaining chip?" Roy Disney's words immediately gave the depressed people a shot in the arm. All the management of the animation department looked at Eric with bright eyes. It was as if Eric said anything inappropriate, they would immediately resign and turn the animation department into a worthless empty shell. There was a big difference between hand-drawn animation and computer animation. The production of computer animation not only required skilled digital animators, but also a large number of technical patents, tools, software, and technical support departments. Therefore, it was not so easy for a digital animator to change jobs. But at the end of the day, hand-drawn animation was an industry that did not require too much skill. An animator could participate in the production of hand-drawn animation after a few years of training. Moreover, even if they left their original company, hand-drawn animators could continue their career without any obstacles. Eric certainly knew this. Looking at more than a dozen pairs of eyes staring at him, Eric smiled, rubbed the folder on the table, and said, "Everyone, there's no need to test each other anymore. The decision to abolish Disney's hand-drawn animation department has been approved by the 3 directors of Firefly, Warren Buffett, Tom Murphy, and David West, so there will be no more surprises in this decision." There was a commotion in the meeting room again, but in the end, no one was so angry that they slammed the door and left. Even Peter Schneider, who was just furious, just glared at Eric. Eric patiently waited for the crowd to quiet down again, and then continued, "Then, let's talk about the disadvantages of your resignation first. You can all leave and turn the animation department into a worthless empty shell. This won't cause any damage to Firefly at all. But then, let's make the most perfect assumption. You found a new employer who completely agrees to the generous conditions you propose to Firefly, such as an average monthly salary of more than $10,000, a brand new workplace, and so on. Then, this negotiation will take at least half a year. After half a year, you'll still have to start from scratch. You'll have to set up a new animation department, start making development plans, and look for suitable animation projects. This will take another half a year. Then, you'll have to start planning for the animation project. Everyone knows how long this will take, and it's very uncertain. Maybe it will take 2 years from the time you leave to the time when the first animation starts production, and the production will take at least 2 years. Then, your new animation department will probably take 4 years to produce the first animated movie. Don't doubt it. If you have good memories, you should clearly remember how long it took from Michael Eisner's decision to revitalize the animation department to the release of The Little Mermaid. 5 years, and I've even shortened the time by 1 year. So, according to the salary conditions you've proposed, the entire animation department will need to spend at least $100 million every year to maintain its operations. That's $400 million in 4 years, which is enough to produce 5 blockbuster films. At that time, if the animated movie you produce is not as amazing as The Lion King, think about how the new employer will feel after patiently waiting for 4 years and investing a large sum of money. You should all know that The Lion King is an accident. The average standard of Disney's animation department should be films like Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast. So, there's a 90% chance that they'll be very, very disappointed. Then, they'll reduce the expenditure of the animation department. With the budget reduced, the quality of the animated movie will be affected, and then it'll be a common vicious cycle. After saying this, Eric paused for a moment, as if waiting for the reaction of the people in the conference room who had lost their arrogance. However, Eric was very sure that they would not have any reaction because what he had just said was the truth. In the original space-time, after Katzenberg left Disney and set up his own company, he poached a group of people from Disney Animation to establish DreamWorks Animation. From the establishment of DreamWorks Animation to the release of The Prince of Egypt, it took exactly 4 years, and the box office of The Prince of Egypt was lukewarm. DreamWorks Animation's second animated movie, Shrek, was released a full 3 years later. If it wasn't for Shrek's box office explosion, DreamWorks Animation, which had only produced 2 animated movies in 7 years, would have to close down and disband. After waiting for a while, Eric gently clapped his hands and said, "Sorry, forgive me for acting like a talkative villain just now. Oh, no, my role today seems to be a talkative villain. However, I have to add that if you jump ship, you'll be violating the labor contract. The year-end bonus that should be due to the box office success of The Lion King will be gone. This year-end bonus should be equivalent to more than half a year's salary for most people." Sitting next to Eric, Roger Ailes asked in a dry voice, "Mr. Williams, may we know why you insist on canceling 2D animation production?" "It's just like how the steam textile machine replaced the manual textile machine, and the electric textile machine replaced the steam textile machine. This is the inevitable trend of technological development. 3D animation movies have too many advantages. Of course, this point can only be proven with time. If you find out that I'm wrong in a few years, then you can laugh at me as much as you want. But for now, I stand by my judgment. I've given everyone enough time to change. But recent events have made me realize that it's better for everyone to go their own way." Roger Ailes glanced at the silent Roy Disney and Peter Schneider. He sighed and didn't say anything else. Of course, Eric would not take out the detailed information for these people to see. Seeing that no one asked anything, he continued, "Now, let's talk about the benefits of selling the animation department. First of all, even if you leave, your share of the profits of The Lion King will still be in your hands. Second, you can negotiate with the new owners. I believe that the treatment you'll get will be much better than negotiating separately. Also, you can take away a few 2D animation projects that the animation department has already prepared and are ready to enter production. Let me take a look. Oh, Stranger in the Wind, Mulan, and Mount Tai. These are all great ideas. Moreover, you can also take away the rights to the sequels of the 2D animated films such as The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin. These will greatly reduce the time it takes for you to produce results." Under the surprised gaze, Roger Ailes asked in an incredulous tone, "Mr. Williams, are you sure you're not joking?" If Eric's resolute decision to sell Disney's animation department had already made everyone feel that he was abnormal, asking them to leave with the copyright of The Lion King immediately made everyone feel that he had gone completely crazy. Of course, Eric wasn't crazy. Instead, he calmly explained, "Of course, I'm not joking. However, what you can take away is the very simple production rights of the sequels to The Lion King. Your new employer only has the right to use these rights to produce sequels and make profits through the distribution of the movies. The cartoon image of The Lion King and other movies, as well as the rights to develop the periphery, still belong to Firefly. Although the global box office of The Lion King in the original space-time exceeded $900 million, the sequels were still released on video. However, Eric believed that if he could get the rights to the sequel, even if he did not have the rights to develop the peripherals, other film companies would definitely not hesitate to develop the sequel under the stimulation of the $900 million box office of The Lion King. At that time, Firefly could still use the influence of these sequels to sell peripheral films. With the current trend of The Lion King's global box office explosion, Roger Ailes could also understand the harsh and tempting conditions of Eric's conditions. At the same time, he began to involuntarily think about the plot of The Lion King sequels. Then, one last point. After the animation department is packaged and sold successfully, you will receive 5% of the total transaction amount as a reward. There is no precedent for this. Consider it a compensation that Firefly is willing to use as a bargaining chip for this transaction. If Eric had proposed this condition first, it would have caused a strong reaction. However, there was not much resistance now. Peter Schneider, who had been silent for a long time, said, "Mr. Williams, a 5% bonus is too little. The average annual salary of the employees in the animation department is about $50,000. If the animation department is sold for $1 billion this time, you will receive an average compensation of $70,000, which is equivalent to 16 months of salary. Including the bonus of the Lion King, everyone will receive an average of 2 years of salary. After Eric finished his explanation, he looked at Peter Schneider with a sneer and said, "Mr. Schneider, you and Mr. Roy Disney are not on the list of rewards. This is also the last decision I want to announce in this meeting. From now on, you are fired." After the meeting that day, the news that Firefly Group would package and sell the hand-drawn animation department quickly spread throughout Hollywood. And the next day, it was officially confirmed in the Los Angeles Times that Firefly would hold a public auction in a month's time. Immediately after, Firefly responded with an unprecedentedly tough stance to the request of Firefly's creditor alliance to join the group's board of directors. After continuously releasing Firefly Group's financial report for the first half of 1994, the profit forecast for the second half of the year, and the huge deal with Condé Nast for $1.52 billion in paper assets, Firefly Group spokesperson publicly stated that, including the funds brought in by the upcoming sale of the hand-drawn animation department, Firefly Group's expected non-operating free cash flow at the end of 1994 would be no less than $3 billion. This was enough to show Firefly Group's excellent operating and financial status. Firefly Group would regularly disclose relevant operating and financial information to creditors, but did not require creditors' directors to participate in the company's management. If creditors were still worried about the safety of the investment, Firefly Group was very willing to initiate bond repurchase measures in advance. Chapter 649. Most of the people who bought Firefly's long-term bonds were investment institutions such as pension funds and insurance companies in North America and Europe. The biggest characteristic of these investment institutions was the pursuit of the maximum safety of funds, so they were often the main investors in United States Treasury bonds with annual interest rates below 3%. Although the rating agency gave Firefly's long-term bonds a 2A rating, which was slightly lower than the 3A safety rating of United States Treasury bonds, after Firefly released a series of financial data, especially with the stimulation of the upcoming $3 billion of free cash flow, although the rating agency did not raise the rating of Firefly's bonds, a large number of industry analysts publicly said that Firefly's bond investment was almost as safe as United States Treasury bonds. And Firefly's long-term bonds had almost twice the yield of United States Treasury bonds. An annual interest rate of 5%. In this case, even if Firefly did not suddenly give up the hand-drawn animation department and make the creditor alliance lose their bargaining chip, the investment institutions holding Firefly's long-term bonds would not ask Firefly to start the bond repurchase in advance after Firefly's tough statement. This was tantamount to cutting off their own source of income. Therefore, when the news that Firefly was about to sell the animation department caused an uproar in Hollywood and Wall Street, the group of creditor representatives gathered in Los Angeles became the most embarrassed group. As the advocate of the creditor alliance, Ron Perlman immediately focused all his energy on Marvel after returning to New York. Although he could skillfully call the shots in the capital market, in the face of absolute power, Ron Perlman immediately became overwhelmed. Warren Buffett, Tom Murphy, and David West all had extensive connections and influence in New York. As for Katzenberg, a native of Manhattan, he became a member of the campaign team of the then New York mayoral candidate John Lindsay at the age of 19. A few years later, he helped John Lindsay run for president as a financial director. Although he did not succeed, this kind of official resume was difficult for many ordinary people to achieve in their lifetime. Even though he developed in the media industry for many years, Katzenberg was still considered a local in New York. Coupled with the title of the next CEO of the largest media group in the United States, his influence was imaginable. Under the strong push of various forces, the New York District Court was extraordinarily efficient. Ron Perlman, who returned to New York, did not even have time to do anything before he had to face various investigations from law enforcement agencies. When the news of Firefly's decision to sell the animation department reached New York, Ron Perlman, who had a premonition, immediately called Sam Redstone and wanted to agree to Viacom's conditions. Ron Perlman sensitively realized that if he agreed to Viacom's conditions, not only could he immediately get out of the whirlpool that was Marvel, but he could also get $100 million. On the other hand, if he could not make this deal, he would have to deal with Firefly. Viacom was far more eager to get this cabbage than the other major companies. At this time, Sam Redstone was not going to offend Eric Marvel. At this time, Redstone was Redstone would as Viacom's. At this time, Redstone was even more as Viacom readers read say, Redstone's was even more as Viacom. Read. As Viacom read. Redstone, Viacom reds, as Viacom, as Vi's, Viacom, red. Redstone was red. Viacom's this was of course, Redstone, as red. Therefore, Ron Perlman called Lei Sherdong many times, but he couldn't get in touch with Lei Sherdong. A business party was being held at Malibu's Pointy Corner Manor. It had been 2 days since Firefly released a series of news and statements. Although Firefly could completely ignore the creditors' representatives in Los Angeles, it was not in the long-term interest of Firefly. Even if it was a non-listed company, Firefly could not completely break away from the capital market. Not to mention, Eric still developed many industries outside of Firefly. Pension funds and insurance institutions in every state in the United States and European countries were the main investment force of the capital market. Therefore, Eric quickly invited all the creditors' representatives to attend the party at Pointy Corner Manor with the excuse of communication in person to resolve differences. Now that things had developed to this point, there was no need for communication at all. The guests who came to the party did not even mention the creditors' alliance. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Firefly took the initiative to give them a way out. Originally, some of the creditors were worried about Eric's arrogant attitude. After the creditors' representatives arrived at Pointy Corner Manor, they realized that the owner of Firefly was not arrogant like a teenager. Instead, he was as mature and steady as most of their peers. They were all relieved when they saw how well he treated people. In the conversation that followed, these people even gradually ignored Eric's age. Unknowingly, Eric was surrounded in the middle like a myriad of stars surrounding the moon, discussing various economic and political issues with great interest. If we pay more attention, we can find that a new information technology industry has emerged. Although the academic community has called the development of new energy, information technology, space technology, and biotechnology the third industrial revolution, in fact, the only technology that can really touch the lives of ordinary people is information technology. And we all know that the more popular the industry is at the level of ordinary people, the higher the economic value of the industry. Therefore, in the next 10 or even 20 years, mobile communications, personal computers, application software, and the internet will become the most valuable investment targets. Eric, who was surrounded by a group of creditor representatives and senior fund managers in the corner of the hall, held a glass of red wine in his hand, and spoke without any stage fright. A fund manager in a black suit asked, "Eric, I know that outside of Hollywood, you also invested in several high-tech companies such as Cisco, Yahoo, and AOL, but don't you think that high-tech investment is too risky?" As far as I know, one of the investment principles of Mr. Warren Buffett, another shareholder of Firefly, is to avoid high-tech industries as much as possible. I won't comment on Warren's investment philosophy. His supporters will drown me in saliva. Amidst the chuckles, Eric continued, "However, in other times, the risk of investing in high-tech industries is indeed very high. But now it's different. What's coming next is an overall industrial explosion because information technology is involved in so many industries, including almost all aspects of our lives. The semiconductor industry promotes the development of personal computers and mobile communications. Personal computers and mobile communications promote the development of application software, mobile phones, and the internet, and the other three can lead to countless huge industrial clusters. In this overall industrial trend, high-tech investment is very guaranteed. I'm sure that in the next few years, the North American and even global capital markets will definitely lead to a new round of long-term bull market pattern because of the development of new technology industries." Another fund manager asked very keenly, "Eric, do you think there will be a bubble?" Of course, every round of the bull market means a stock market bubble. This time, a big industrial explosion will definitely mean a bigger bubble. Eric's eyes had a different meaning. He glanced around at everyone and said with a faint smile, "In the state of the stock market soaring, even if you didn't hear what I said today, I think you will definitely enter the market without hesitation. However, whether you can restrain your greed and successfully escape in the end will depend on your own luck." Seeing that many people fell into a short period of contemplation, Eric didn't continue. He wanted to reveal a little bit of information to leave a deep impression in the hearts of these fund managers with large amounts of capital. It would definitely bring unexpected benefits in the future, but there was no need to say too much. When Eric saw Elizabeth standing outside in a lavender dress and looking at him with a smile, he raised his glass to the crowd and walked out of the crowd. Eric praised Elizabeth's dress and asked, "When did you come?" "It's been half an hour." Elizabeth still had a smile on her face as she said, "Seeing that you're so comfortable with a group of old men, I didn't want to disturb you." Eric walked to the dining table and picked up a fruit platter. He found a sofa with Elizabeth and sat down. He smiled and continued the girl's words. "It can't be helped. If I get too close to men of the same age, it will cause even more unbearable associations. I guess you guys don't want to see such a scene, right?" Elizabeth smiled and patted Eric on the shoulder. She took a sip of red wine and slowly calmed down. She said, "My dad has been regretting it recently." Eric looked up and asked, "Regretting what?" Elizabeth shrugged and said, "Firefly's paper assets. My dad said that if he knew, it would have cost $15. He could buy it for $200 million. News Corporation would definitely buy it." Eric picked up a piece of apple and stuffed it into his mouth. He said, "It's okay. He's an old man. His memory gets worse and worse. He'll forget about it in a few days." Elizabeth said unhappily, "Eric, can't you be a little more respectful to my dad?" Okay, sorry." Eric also became serious and said, "Then, you must be thinking of buying Disney's animation department again, right?" "Yeah." Elizabeth nodded. She personally trusted Eric's judgment very much. She even worshipped him. Therefore, since Eric still insisted on disbanding the hand-drawn animation department after The Lion King, Elizabeth was not as enthusiastic as the other major Hollywood film companies. But unfortunately, her dad did not think so. Eric said, "Let me tell you, Liz, buying Firefly's paper assets might still be able to maintain a good profit for the next few years. But if you buy the hand-drawn animation department, it's not likely to make money." Elizabeth glanced at Eric. "What's the use of telling me this? You have to tell my dad. I'm not obligated to do that. But don't get involved this time." Eric thought for a while and said, "Even if your dad tries his best, I don't think he'll be able to get it this time." Elizabeth asked curiously, "Oh, which company do you think is most likely to buy the animation department?" Eric recalled some of the information collected by Kelly in the past few days and said, "I think it's most likely Warner. Warner's film business this summer is really terrible. If Terry Semel doesn't do something to give the board of directors and shareholders enough confidence, it'll probably be difficult for him to stay in the CEO position for too long." The second is Paramount. "I heard that Paramount plans to use Blockbuster to imitate Disney's strategy," Eric said with a hint of schadenfreude. "There are more than 3,000 Blockbuster chain stores in the United States. That's more than 6 times the number of Disney stores in the world. This is indeed a very good idea. Unfortunately, Paramount doesn't have many movies to develop. I don't know why, but I find it funny when I think about it." "Haha, sorry, let me laugh." Elizabeth rolled her eyes a little. After Eric finished laughing, she said, "I thought you would think Universal was the most likely. After all, Michael Eisner was once the CEO of Disney." Eric shrugged and said, "Universal and Columbia can forget about it. Michael Eisner definitely wants the animation department, but he doesn't have that much power. Now Universal and Columbia are in the hands of the Japanese. The Japanese are sometimes very generous, but sometimes very stingy. Their animation industry is very developed. Correspondingly, although they won't look down on Hollywood animation companies, they won't be willing to spend more than $1 billion to buy a hand-drawn animation department. Finally, MGM has no hope. As for you guys, I think News Corporation's business focus should be on the TV network. You won't be as desperate as Warner and Paramount, right?" Elizabeth nodded slightly. She had to admit that Eric's analysis was very reasonable. Since Firefly bought ABC and no longer cooperated with Fox, News Corporation had focused most of its energy on operating the TV network this year in order to maintain the market share of Fox. For this reason, they even did not hesitate to let the film department reduce production again. After making up her mind not to try to influence her old man's decision, Elizabeth was relieved and asked, "Hey, didn't you want to take over that comic company recently? Which superhero copyright do you have your eyes on?" "There are too many. Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Hulk, Iron Man and so on. Actually, I'm a comic book fan." "Can you tell?" Elizabeth showed a look of disdain and said, "You're talking nonsense again. How come I've never seen you read comics?" Eric smiled and said, "This shows that we still need to understand each other better." Chapter 650. Seeing that Elizabeth still wanted to ask, Eric shook his head and said, "Don't ask about this. I can't explain it clearly now. But Marvel is a big dish. Firefly's family won't be able to finish it. Everyone will have a share." After listening to Eric's nonsense, Elizabeth, who had no intention of continuing the topic, became curious again. If even Firefly can't finish it, then how much potential does Marvel have? Just as she was about to continue asking, a waiter hurried to Eric's side and said a few words in his ear. Eric nodded to the waiter and said to Elizabeth, "Come with me, let's welcome the guest." Elizabeth stood up and asked, "Who is it?" Eric raised his arm to Elizabeth and waited for the girl to hold him. He said, "Terry Semel from Warner, so be more intimate." Elizabeth immediately guessed Eric's intention. If the two of them were intimate, Terry Semel, who came for the Disney animation department, would definitely re-evaluate Fox's competitiveness, and Firefly would get a higher price. "Humph, you actually used me," Elizabeth grumbled, but she still obediently leaned against Eric, and the two of them went out to greet them. Terry Semel had gray hair and a pair of rimless glasses. He had the elegant temperament of a scholar. Although he was just in his early 50s, he had worked in Warner for nearly 20 years. He was one of the important successors trained by Steve Ross. However, after the death of Steve Ross, Terry Semel, who became the CEO of Time Warner after a fierce internal competition, had not been having a good time recently. On the big side, after the merger between Firefly and ABC, Time Warner was immediately kicked off the throne of the media overlord that had been sitting firmly for many years. On the small side, during this hot summer where the total box office once again broke the Hollywood box office record, Time Warner's film and television business went against the trend and reached the lowest level in many years. All of this led to Terry Semel receiving tremendous pressure from all sides almost every day recently. When he heard the news that Firefly was about to sell the Disney animation department, Terry Semel immediately realized that this was a great opportunity to get out of his current predicament. Firefly's starting price of $1 billion USD was nothing to Time Warner, which had a scale of tens of billions of USD. But if they could take over the animation department, Time Warner would be able to immediately open up the animation film market that they had never been able to open up before. This would be very good news for him personally. After Terry Semel got out of the car, he saw Eric walking towards him. Just as he was about to greet him, he noticed Elizabeth beside Eric. In recent years, Murdoch's outstanding daughter's achievements in Hollywood were obvious to all. Terry Semel had vaguely heard that Elizabeth had a close relationship with Eric. However, as Eric's status increased, the media was afraid of his influence. Hence, there were fewer and fewer reports about his private life. Terry Semel really did not know what the relationship between the two of them was. Seeing Elizabeth holding Eric's arm intimately, Terry Semel's eyes suddenly narrowed. If Eric and Elizabeth were lovers, it would be a big variable in Time Warner's acquisition of Disney's animation department. After all, Fox would definitely not let go of this opportunity easily. Eric noticed the change in Terry Semel's expression. He smiled and took the initiative to extend his hand to the other party. "Mr. Semel, welcome to Sharp Corner Manor." Terry Semel quickly put away his thoughts to deal with Eric and greeted Elizabeth warmly. The three of them then walked into the villa. "Eric, can we talk alone?" Terry Semel whispered to Eric after socializing with the guests in the hall. Eric knew that Terry Semel wanted nothing more than to take over the animation department before the public auction. Perhaps he also wanted to bargain for the copyright of animation such as The Lion King. Anyway, the animation department was the private property of Firefly. The form of sale was up to Eric. However, the animation department was originally just bait that Eric put out to attract the attention of Hollywood. Before he successfully took over Marvel, he did not intend to have any entanglement with the other major companies in this regard. Just as he was about to find an excuse to refuse Terry Semel, he heard someone report that Paramount's CEO, Shirley Lansing, had also arrived at Sharp Corner Manor. "Sorry, Mr. Semel, I need to pick someone up. Maybe we can make another appointment." Eric apologized to Terry Semel and walked out of the villa with Elizabeth again. There were no eternal enemies in the business world. Although Lei Sherdong did not appear in person due to the conflict in the process of competing for Disney, he still sent Shirley Lansing, the CEO of Paramount, to come to this party. For many people, the timing was very sensitive. After Shirley Lansing, many important people in Hollywood also arrived one after another. With everyone having their own thoughts, they did not have a chance to contact Eric alone. Although no reporters were invited to the party, the competitive scene at Sharp Corner Manor was immediately spread the next day. Later, Eric simply asked someone to post the list of the animation department's assets and related information on Yahoo, which immediately caused a heated discussion again. The focus of the media's attention was mainly on the seemingly very low auction price of $1 billion. The net profit of The Lion King for Firefly in the next few years would be no less than $1 billion. To sell Disney's animation department to resist the invasion of capital, Eric Williams has undoubtedly made a very crazy, willful, and stupid decision. Although the box office output of Disney's animation department is very low in the revenue of the entire Firefly Group, don't forget that Disney's amusement parks, surrounding stores, and exclusive licensing business all need the locomotive effect of Disney's animation. The box office success of The Lion King further proves that Disney's animation has unlimited economic potential. It's hard for us to imagine where the Disney brand will go after losing Disney's animation department. Although we have no way of knowing why Eric Williams abandoned the Disney animation department, the auction price of $1 billion shows the shrewdness of the Firefly Group. This low pricing strategy will undoubtedly attract more investors who are interested in acquiring the Disney animation department, and then create more intense competition in the auction process. At present, the three local giants in Hollywood, Time Warner, Viacom, and News Corporation, have expressed a strong interest in the Disney animation department. The French Vivendi Group and the Canadian Seagram Group, who intend to enter Hollywood, have also begun to have close contact with the senior management of Firefly. According to the estimates of First B City Bank, the final auction price of the Disney animation department is likely to exceed $2 billion, which will be more than twice the price offered by Firefly. Walt Disney's nephew, Roy Disney, has publicly criticized Eric Williams for wantonly erasing the spirit of Disney, claiming that without the Disney animation department, Walt Disney's philosophy will also be gone. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, Walt Disney's daughter, Diana Disney Miller, also expressed extreme disappointment with the Firefly Group's decision. Eric Williams's business talent in film and television has been proven countless times, so I think everyone should have a good reason to pay attention to another thing that happened at the same time as Firefly's sale of the animation department, and that is why Firefly went to such great lengths to seize Marvel Entertainment from Wall Street investor Ron Perlman. Although most media outlets are inclined to believe that this is Firefly Group's retaliation for Ron Perlman's actions of inciting Firefly's creditors, with Eric Williams's outstanding business performance over the years, I absolutely do not believe that this young Hollywood mogul will be so impulsive as to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to retaliate against his enemy. What's more, the whole thing has obviously been carefully planned, and even the legendary investor Warren Buffett is involved. This evidence is enough to prove that the whole thing is not revenge. Perhaps, in the eyes of Eric Williams, Marvel Entertainment is more important than the Disney animation department that created The Lion King. If this is the case, if any bold investor dares to make a move at this time to seize Marvel, there is no doubt that they will reap unexpected rewards. Ron Perlman sat in his luxury car and silently flipped through a thick stack of today's newspapers. In a piece of news about Firefly's upcoming sale of the animation department, he finally saw someone mention Marvel, and the article in the Manhattan Morning Post was almost exactly the same as his recent speculation about Marvel's series of events. However, Ron Perlman did not feel any excitement at finding a confidant at all, because 2 days ago, the New York District Court quickly approved the mandatory bankruptcy protection proposed by Marvel's creditors with astonishing efficiency. Then, with the cooperation of Marvel's CEO Avi Allard, Marvel's creditors, represented by Katzenberg, quickly took control of Marvel's board of directors again. The luxury car slowly stopped outside Marvel's headquarters on 50th Street in Midtown Manhattan. After Ron Perlman got out of the car, he walked into Marvel's office building with his assistant. It happened to be working hours, and a few Marvel employees were waiting for the elevator in the corner of the lobby. When they saw Ron Perlman walk in, they immediately stopped whispering and tiptoed around Ron Perlman, heading toward the safety stairs. Ron Perlman had long known that most of Marvel's employees were very disgusted with him. If it was in the past, he would not have cared about these small fries at all, but today, Ron Perlman looked at the Marvel employees who avoided him like he was the plague, and a strong sense of anger suddenly rose in his heart. Clenching his fists, Ron Perlman said in a cold voice to his assistant beside him, "Neil, go record the names of those people, and then inform the Human Resources Department to get lost." Assistant Neil looked at his almost hysterical boss and wanted to remind him of something, but Ron Perlman had already roared, "Even you want to go against me? I'm still the owner of Marvel." Neil did not dare to hesitate at all and hurriedly walked toward the safety stairs. When he reached the floor of Marvel Entertainment's headquarters, Ron Perlman found that all the lights in the corridor were still on, and not far away, there were people coming in and out of the conference room with documents in their hands. Feeling that something was wrong, Ron Perlman quickened his pace and walked into the conference room. He found that Jeffrey Katzenberg, Avi Allard, and the others were all there, and it was obvious that those who were flipping through various reports and financial data were either lawyers or accountants. Katzenberg, who had faint dark circles under his eyes, looked up from a pile of documents when he heard the reminder from the person next to him. When he saw Ron Perlman, he raised his hand to look at his watch and suddenly said, "It's already 9 o'clock." With that said, Katzenberg stood up from his chair and stretched his body. He ordered his assistant to prepare breakfast for him, and then walked straight to the door. Ron Perlman had long expected that once Firefly took control of Marvel, he would definitely attack Marvel's financial situation first. However, he did not expect that Katzenberg had already led people to start reviewing Marvel's financial documents without any notice at all. This made his suppressed anger erupt again. Seeing Katzenberg walking toward him, Ron Perlman gritted his teeth and said, "You don't have my permission. This is illegal. I will protest to the federal court. I definitely will." Katzenberg stretched his stiff neck and came to Ron Perlman's side. He did not care about Ron Perlman's threat at all. He patted him a few times on the shoulder and said, "Go ahead and protest, Ron. But before that, I think we have to have a good talk first. For example, that $700 million thing." Katzenberg left the meeting room after saying these words. Ron Perlman felt a chill in his heart. The number that Katzenberg had casually said was exactly the same as the amount of Marvel's debt financing that he had embezzled. This probably meant that in just one night, Firefly had grasped enough information. He just did not know that Firefly had roughly grasped this data before launching an attack on Marvel. If there was not enough evidence, the New York District Court would not have approved the bankruptcy protection application of Marvel's creditors so quickly. What Katzenberg was doing at this time was just looking for accurate evidence from Marvel's internal documents. Unable to attack Katzenberg, Ron Perlman unwillingly pointed his finger at Marvel's CEO Avi Allard. "Avi, why did you betray me? Don't forget, I supported you to get the position of Marvel CEO. *PS. One more update. Star. Chapter 651. Ron, I'm a professional manager, not a capitalist. Avi Allard pointed to the old office supplies in the conference room and said, "Look at what you've been doing all these years. You only know how to exploit Marvel without restraint. Many people have left in the past few years. The company has no chance of survival, and it's also burdened with huge debts. If this continues, Marvel will definitely die. I'm just saving this company, isn't that right?" Ron Perlman's face was a little embarrassed, but he immediately retorted angrily, "But you shouldn't have betrayed me. If you have any opinions, you can discuss them with me. When Avi Allard heard Ron Perlman's words, he almost laughed out loud. "Ron, don't you remember how many times I almost begged you to discuss with me?" Ron Perlman didn't know if he was angry or embarrassed. He was almost incoherent as he emphasized again, "You. Don't forget, I'm the owner of this company." "You won't be soon." Avi Allard suddenly lost interest in talking to Ron Perlman. He left this sentence coldly and walked out of the conference room. More than half an hour later, Katzenberg, Avi Allard, Ron Perlman, and their respective lawyers gathered in another conference room of Marvel. As if he didn't notice Ron Perlman, who had regained his fighting spirit after calming down, Katzenberg opened a thick stack of documents that he had organized last night and went straight to the point. "Ron, now you have two choices. First, settle in private. Andrew Holdings will pay a sum of money and buy all the Marvel shares on the market at the current stock price. Then implement a 100% debt-for-equity strategy and hand over Marvel to us. I personally think this is the best way to solve the current situation." Hearing Ron Perlman's cold snort, Katzenberg did not mind. He continued in a cold, formulaic tone, "Then, second, we will apply to the SEC to investigate Andrews Holdings' embezzlement of Marvel's debt financing. Although this investigation and the subsequent lawsuit will take a long time, no matter how long it is delayed, with all the evidence, you will still have to return all the debt financing embezzled from Marvel. In addition, you will also face a huge fine from the SEC. I assure you that without $1 billion, you won't be able to win this lawsuit. After spending $1 billion, I think you won't be far from bankruptcy." A middle-aged man sitting next to Ron Perlman said, "Mr. Katzenberg, can I take this as a threat to my client?" Katzenberg glanced at Ron Perlman's lawyer and said with a faint smile, "You should know that I'm in the movie industry, so don't use common lines in movies in this kind of situation. It will make you look very unprofessional." The middle-aged man obviously had the basic thick skin of a lawyer. He didn't mind Katzenberg's sarcasm and insisted, "Mr. Katzenberg, you didn't answer my question." Katzenberg shrugged and said, "I'm not threatening your client. I'm just stating a basic fact and some of Firefly's determination." Ron Perlman stopped the private lawyer who wanted to continue speaking and said to Katzenberg, "Jeffrey, I won't choose either of these two conditions. Don't forget, Marvel's bankruptcy protection period is 1 month. As long as I can come up with a reasonable solution to the current situation within a month, Marvel will still be mine. No one can take it away from me." "That's right, it's 1 month, but..." Katzenberg said contemptuously, "You can't come up with any way to revive Marvel because the current Marvel is just an empty shell. Other than the toy department that can barely operate, Marvel Movies is an empty shell, Marvel TV is an empty shell, and the music department is an empty shell. Even Marvel's foundation, the comics department, the 7 chief writers responsible for the creation of popular comics such as X-Men and Fantastic Four have all left 2 years ago. Now, it's no different from an empty shell. Mr. Ron Perlman, tell me, how do you plan to revive Marvel?" Ron Perlman shouted at Carson without hesitation, "Don't think that I don't know. Firefly Group doesn't care about what you said at all. What you really want is the copyrights to Marvel's superheroes. Let me tell you, you will never succeed. I'd rather sell Marvel to any third party for $1 than give it to Firefly." Katzenberg, who had a fiery temper, also raised his voice. "But you don't have the authority to sell Marvel to a third party for $1 because the federal court won't allow you to do such a thing that harms the interests of creditors. Even if you want to sell, you can only sell to Firefly. Don't even think about it. It's always been me taking things from others. No one can take away what belongs to me. Do you think it's still the 1980s? Go to downtown and take a look. De Chong Securities no longer exists. It's gone." The originally unfriendly meeting soon erupted into a fierce quarrel. Just when the two sides were about to fight, Avi Allard and the other onlookers came back to their senses and hurriedly pulled Katzenberg and Ron Perlman away. Ron Perlman finally calmed down after crazily smashing everything in the office. He left Marvel headquarters with his lawyer and assistant without saying goodbye. Eric, who was in Los Angeles, immediately learned about the conflict between the two from Avi Allard, who was worried that things would change again because of this argument. However, he was not too worried. If he wanted to use gentle means to take down Marvel, Eric could have sent Frank Wells to take charge of this matter. However, doing so would only make Ron Perlman greedy. Katzenberg's strong and irritable personality happened to be able to restrain Ron Perlman's insatiable greed. After the first negotiation ended unhappily, Ron Perlman did not continue to contact Firefly. Instead, he immediately flew to Los Angeles in an attempt to once again transfer Marvel, a burden destined to be lost, to several major Hollywood film companies. However, all eyes were focused on Disney's animation department. No one in Hollywood paid attention to Ron Perlman. Even Michael Eisner, who realized that it was impossible to get Panasonic support to acquire the animation department, did not intend to make a move because he also regretfully realized that the Japanese would not support Universal because of the conflict between Marvel and Firefly. Subsequently, Ron Perlman still did not give up and tried to sound out some companies interested in the entertainment industry. However, most of the weaker companies did not want to provoke the capital forces represented by the first and second richest people in the UA at the same time. Companies with enough strength also realized that to solve Marvel's dilemma, they needed to invest hundreds of millions of dollars. However, even if they took over Marvel and wanted to develop Marvel's film rights, they still could not do without Hollywood support. And as the biggest local snake in Hollywood, Firefly certainly would not let these outsiders who stole their prey have a good life. In the end, the loss outweighed the gain. In desperation, Ron Perlman even thought about the long-term bonds of Firefly in his hands. But in the end, nothing was settled. Not to mention that Andrews Holdings' bond was only worth $400 million, which was not enough to make up for Marvel's deficit. Also, aware of Ron Perlman's recent predicament, the investment companies that were interested in taking over the bond offered lower and lower prices, with the highest offer being a 10% discount. It was a loss of $40 million in just a few months. Ron Perlman also found it hard to accept. More than a week passed like this. Firefly did not seem to have the slightest intention of urging, but Ron Perlman found that he was at a dead end. If the stalemate continued, and he still could not come up with any feasible company restructuring measures after a month of bankruptcy protection, Marvel would face forced bankruptcy liquidation. Early in the morning of August 21st, Avi Allard had just sat down in his office when he received a call from Ron Perlman. The hoarse voice on the phone barely maintained the last bit of strength. "I don't want to see Jeffrey Katzenberg again. I want Eric Williams to talk to me in person. Star." Chapter 652. The black sedan passed through the busy studio area of Firefly Studios. Ron Perlman looked at the crowd outside the window absent-mindedly, thinking about what might happen next. The sedan stopped in front of the studio's administrative office building. The driver opened the door, and Ron Perlman saw three people standing not far away as soon as he got out of the car. The young man in the white shirt in the middle was particularly conspicuous as he was surrounded by men and women in suits and professional suits. "We finally meet, Mr. Perlman," Eric smiled and shook hands with Ron Perlman, who walked over. He then introduced, "This is Mr. Frank Wells, the president of Firefly Group. This lady is my personal assistant, Miss Kelly Haynes." Ron Perlman almost immediately realized the familiar good cop and bad cop joke from Eric's perfect behavior. Jeffrey Katzenberg was undoubtedly the bad cop before, but even if he realized this little trick, the contrast with what he had encountered in the past week made Ron Perlman feel much better. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Williams," Ron Perlman said with a hint of friendliness in his tone. He shook hands with Eric, Frank, and Kelly one by one. After the introductions, Eric said, "I think you must not have had time to have lunch. There is a small restaurant here." Ron Perlman, of course, did not refuse. He brought his assistant and Eric to the restaurant inside the studio where Eric often ate. After all, the two sides had just experienced a conflict. A simple lunch could only alleviate the awkwardness between them. After all, it was impossible for them to really warm up. After asking the waiter to remove the cutlery and change the coffee, Eric finally talked about business. He said, "Ron, since you want to talk to me in person, then I think you must have your own solution for the Marvel matter, right?" There was a hint of bitterness in Ron Perlman's heart again, but he still nodded. "Yes, Eric." After saying this, Ron Perlman still hesitated for a moment with some reluctance, but in the end, he still continued somewhat dejectedly. I basically agree with Firefly Group's debt-for-equity strategy, but there's one condition. Firefly Group has to bear the compensation to the shareholders of Marvel's circulating shares alone. My bottom line is just to take out the Marvel shares in my hands. Eric did not have Katzenberg's impatience at all. He still said calmly, "But this is too unfair to Firefly. We are weaker creditors than Marvel's shareholders. If Firefly bears this loss, our losses will increase again." Although Eric's words were not wrong logically, Ron Perlman still felt that it was too ridiculous to link the word weak with Firefly. "Eric, I know you definitely value Marvel very much. Its value will far exceed everyone's expectations. Since I've completely lost this time, I don't intend to continue to insist on anything now. The condition just now is my bottom line." Eric pondered for a moment and looked at Kelly beside him. How much will it cost to redeem all the Marvel shares on the market? Kelly almost wanted to roll her eyes at the pretentious Eric, but she still replied straightforwardly, "Marvel's stock price has fluctuated a lot recently, but according to the average of the stock price in the past 7 days, it will cost about $72 million to redeem all the Marvel shares on the market." $72 million is not a lot of money. Eric turned to look at Ron Perlman, ignoring the flash of joy in his eyes. He changed the topic and said, "According to Marvel's current situation, without Firefly's intervention, Marvel will have to take the initiative to apply for bankruptcy protection in federal court in a year at most. I'm guessing that, at that time, if Andrew Holdings wants to solve this problem, it will definitely not be something that can be solved with $72 million." From Eric's tone just now, Ron Perlman thought that he was going to bear this expense and was a little relieved. But when he heard Eric's next words, he was disappointed and tried to act shamelessly. "Eric, my company has no more funds. I'm sure you don't want this to drag on, right?" Eric shook his head and said, "No, you have funds. Everyone knows that you bought $400 million of Firefly bonds. I'm guessing that a long-term holding strategy is not in line with your investment creed. In that case, Firefly can redeem the bonds in your hands in advance, all or part of them. Of course, Firefly will never bargain like Wall Street investors. We can completely redeem the bonds at par." Ron Perlman did not expect Eric to know that his peers took the opportunity to bargain with him. Although he did not show any change on the surface, he still cursed in his heart. Eric was right. He did not have the intention to hold Firefly bonds for a long time. Originally, he planned to only keep a portion of the bonds to maintain his status as a creditor after he got the Firefly board seat and sell the rest. With the popularity of Firefly's long-term bonds, even if he only held them for a few months, he could make a few million in profit. Even if he could not sell them immediately, the $400 million of bonds could still bring in a stable $22 million of interest dividends every year. Eric's seemingly generous redemption plan would still cost him at least a few million dollars. Noticing Ron Perlman's conflicted expression, Eric did not rush him. He seemed to have thought of something and whispered to Frank Wales next to him. Ron Perlman was indeed conflicted. He suddenly realized that after going around in circles, he still had to accept the first solution proposed by Katzenberg more than a week ago. The only difference was that Eric's attitude towards this matter was very gentle, without the slightest bit of Katzenberg's aggressiveness. But this was nothing. If he could earn a lot of US dollars, Ron Perlman would not mind greeting the person he hated the most with a smile. Sensing that Eric and Frank Wales finished talking and looked at him again, Ron Perlman knew that he had no other choice. He could only say, "Eric, it's only $72 million. If Marvel's stock price rises, I won't pay a penny more." Eric nodded and did not care about these small details. He believed that Ron Perlman would not be stupid enough to continue doing anything. He said, "No problem." Ron Perlman thought for a moment and immediately added, "Also, I hope that Firefly can change someone to be in charge of this matter. This is also why I brought Frank here." Eric smiled and pointed at Frank Wales next to him. "Frank will be fully in charge of this matter. Then you two can talk first. I still have work to do. Excuse me." After saying goodbye to Frank Wales and Ron Perlman, Eric brought Kelly to the Victoria's Secret studio. He noticed that the female assistant kept looking at him. He smiled and said, "Just say what you want to say?" "No, I just feel that the way you handle this matter is completely like a middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s. That's not right." Kelly shook her head and said, "You seem to have always been like this. It's so strange. I rarely see your youthful side." Eric looked around and leaned closer to the female assistant. He whispered, "Why don't we work overtime tonight? I'll let you see my youthful side." Kelly blushed and pushed Eric away. She said, "I promised Nina to have dinner together. You can go and flirt with those little models in the studio. They'll definitely be more than willing." Eric shook his head and said, "I usually don't do anything with my female lead." Seeing Kelly's disdainful look, Eric explained awkwardly, "At least not during the filming period." "This is true. I didn't expect you to be so professional." Kelly smiled and teased, "This has nothing to do with professionalism." Eric shook his head. "You know, I'm generally a very considerate lover. If the female lead still slept next to me last night, and if she didn't perform well on set the next day, it would be difficult for me to scold her without any scruples. This feeling of wanting to flare up but not being able to do so is actually very uncomfortable." Kelly rolled her eyes at Eric charmingly. Her tone was a little coquettish. "Okay, I take back what I said just now. You're a little bastard with violent tendencies. Star." Chapter 653. It was now September. The North American summer movie season ended at 21. It ended perfectly with a total box office of US $700 million. Of course, this perfect was only relative to most Hollywood studios. For Warner, this summer was very imperfect. As the holidays passed, the 4 major US public TV stations and a large number of cable TV stations also began to compete for the ratings of the fall TV series. Various new episodes or sequels of US TV series began to air at the end of August. ABC Television Network, which had just been acquired by Firefly Group, undoubtedly received the most attention. Before the merger of the two sides, ABC had already begun to occupy the largest TV market share. Once the programs launched by ABC were as popular as the movies of Firefly Pictures, it would mean that the market share of the other major TV stations would continue to be compressed. Moreover, several of ABC's heavily promoted programs did not hide their intention to dominate the TV market as they did in Hollywood. On Monday, ABC's long-running sports program, Monday Night Football, had very stable ratings. Starting from Tuesday, ABC would broadcast Survivor, Emergency Room Stories, and Friends for the next 3 workdays. Although Friends had just been taken back from Fox, this ace comedy program had maintained an average viewership of more than 20 million for the first 5 seasons. It had dominated the comedy TV ratings for 5 consecutive years. After taking back the broadcasting rights of Friends, Firefly's TV department immediately announced that Eric, the creator, would not only personally intervene in the writing of the script for the 6th season, but he would also add more guest stars. Many industry insiders knew that this was just a publicity stunt. It was difficult for Eric to intervene in the timeline and storyline of Friends. The script had been developed for 5 years. At most, he would be a nominal screenwriter. Only celebrity guest stars would be more reliable. But for fans of Friends, the effect of this publicity stunt was still very obvious. The promotion of the 6th season had just begun and it had already caused a heated discussion. The entertainment media also predicted that the ratings of the new season were likely to hit a new high. At the same time, ABC's promotion of the 2 new shows, Survivor and Emergency Room Stories, was no less than Friends. Although the writing and production of these 2 shows had nothing to do with Eric, no one in the industry doubted Eric's taste in choosing shows. In fact, after ABC launched the reality show, Survivor, which had been promoted by the original scriptwriter on several major television networks for a long time, an executive in the program production department at NBC was fired because he missed Survivor. Although there was no lack of internal power struggles, this was enough to prove the strong influence of Firefly in the television industry. Outside of ABC, after Ron Perlman compromised, Firefly successfully took over the entire Marvel Entertainment. When the industry began to pay close attention to which superhero Eric would choose to develop a Marvel movie, Eric did not make any moves in this regard. After completely merging Marvel Entertainment into Firefly Corporation, Eric only injected a sum of money into the struggling Marvel. At the same time, he asked the CEO of Marvel Entertainment, Avi Allard, to buy a comic company called Image Comics. Image Comics did not have the adaptation rights that Eric was interested in. The reason why they bought this comic project, which was only the size of a studio, was mainly to make up for the mistakes made by Ron Perlman. In 1992, because of dissatisfaction with Ron Perlman, the 7 popular chief writers in charge of Marvel's main series such as Spider-Man and X-Men all left to set up Image Comics. After that, the quality of Marvel's comics plummeted. In 1993, Ron Perlman began to issue large amounts of junk bonds under the shell of Marvel. The debt burden of hundreds of millions of dollars immediately dragged Marvel into the abyss. Although Eric was interested in the superhero copyrights in Marvel's hands, Marvel, which had a rich foundation, would still be able to achieve very good revenue even if the comics industry began to shrink as long as it was independent of capital operations and stable operations. Before the development of special effects technology, Eric did not intend to let Hollywood enter the era of comic adaptation so soon. Therefore, before that, letting Marvel be self-sufficient was undoubtedly the best choice. For this reason, Eric also pulled strings and handed over the adaptation rights of the popular movies and comics developed by Firefly in recent years to Marvel. After the announcement of the plan, Marvel, which had begun to decline, immediately entered the vision of manga fans again. The adaptation of the Thunderbolt Girls series, which had just been released during the summer, was listed as the most anticipated manga adaptation in recent years. Of course, although Firefly did not announce any plans to adapt comics to movies on the surface, Eric had already begun to work on the Marvel Cinematic Universe plan in private because he had taken it in before Marvel began to sell the copyrights on a large scale. At this time, the copyrights of Marvel superheroes were not in a mess. Most of the copyrights of the superheroes that were wandering outside had been quietly taken by Drew under Flower Pictures. Firefly could slowly recover the remaining copyrights in the next few years. Therefore, the new Marvel Cinematic Universe was much larger than the original spacetime. Almost all of them were dumbfounded when Katzenberg and the other core executives of Firefly saw the tree map of the Marvel Cinematic Universe plan that spanned from 2000 to 2030 in Eric's study at the Pointy Corner Manor for the first time. Frank Wills, who had already passed his 60th birthday, teased himself regretfully that he would definitely not be able to see the day this plan was completed. At the same time, in September, Michael Lynn, whose contract had been delayed for several months, announced his departure. Katzenberg officially took over the position of CEO of Firefly Group. This handover did not cause any waves, nor did it lead to an internal power struggle like Warner. Everything seemed to be logical. After becoming CEO, Katzenberg continued to adjust the television business under Firefly Group. The first thing he faced was to sell the hand-drawn animation department separated from Disney at a good price. At the same time, he had to re-establish a completely digital Disney animation department. Eric did not intend to turn Pixar directly into Disney's animation department. Pixar, located in San Francisco Bay, had a completely independent corporate culture and creative philosophy. Forcing it would only disrupt Pixar's own rhythm. However, the new Disney animation department would receive Pixar's unreserved technical support. Moreover, from the long pace of animation production, Pixar and the future Disney animation department would not form a competitive relationship. Instead, they would be able to provide Firefly with sufficient 3D animation content. What's more, maintaining appropriate competition between the different departments was also a good way to stimulate creative vitality. In addition to all these things, the Victoria's Secret annual show, which Eric had invested a lot of energy in, had also entered the rehearsal stage. For the Victoria's Secret show, the media would criticize and ridicule Eric's improper work every 2 to 3 days. After the Victoria's Secret show began the early publicity, an NBC financial program even calculated for Eric. If he used the time spent on the Victoria's Secret show to shoot a movie, even if the new movie only achieved half of the results of Jurassic Park, the new movie could still bring him and Firefly Group no less than $300 million in profit. However, the expensive underwear fashion show was said to cost $20 million. Even if Eric's reputation could receive very high ratings and even recoup some of the investment through the release of videos, the possibility of recouping $20 million in investment was still very slim, and the possibility of profit was even slimmer. However, Eric had never thought of using the Victoria's Secret show to make a profit. Although the NBC program had caused a lot of discussion, its calculation was very unreliable in the eyes of many people, let alone Eric, who only laughed it off. After the Victoria's Secret show plan was revealed, Eric and Victoria's Secret were frequently linked by the media. The huge advertising effect had already increased Victoria's Secret's revenue by 30% in 3 months compared to the same period last year. Eric believed that after the more intensive media bombardment before and after the Victoria's Secret show, it was not impossible for Victoria's Secret's revenue to increase by 100%. One must know that Victoria's Secret's market share was only about 10% now. In the original space-time, Victoria's Secret had more than 40% of the market share. The annual show that Victoria's Secret insisted on holding every year undoubtedly played a very big role in marketing. The huge profit brought by 40% of the underwear market share was definitely not something that a movie could compare to. At the same time, Eric also planned to combine the Victoria's Secret show and Yahoo's portal to launch the first large-scale online marketing in the history of the Internet. This would further increase the traffic and popularity of Yahoo's portal. For Yahoo, which was about to launch its IPO strategy next year, the invisible profit it would bring was immeasurable. At Firefly Cineplex, a business SUV was parked outside the Victoria's Secret studio. Tina Brown kept a document that she had been reading repeatedly along the way into her briefcase. She looked out of the window and said to the 2 girls beside her who seemed to be a little nervous, "Carolyn, Melanie, we're here. Let's get out of the car." Carolyn also glanced at the huge studio outside the window. She looked at Tina Brown's briefcase and said politely, "Ms. Brown, let me help you carry it." Tina Brown smiled and shook her head. Perhaps it was because of the obvious British lady's temperament that she had a good impression of this petite girl. "Carolyn, you're going to be Mr. Williams' assistant. I dare not let you carry my things for me." Carolyn blushed when she saw Tina Brown's flirtatious expression when she mentioned Eric. She said, I still don't know if I'm qualified for that job." The 3 of them got out of the car and Kelly, who was already waiting at the door, came up to them. After greeting Tina Brown, Kelly's gaze immediately fell on Carolyn, who was as petite as a doll. "You must be Carolyn." "I'm Kelly Haynes." "Nice to meet you, Ms. Cairns." Carolyn already knew beforehand that Kelly would be her boss. However, the little girl could not help but feel an inexplicable sense of inferiority when she saw the capable and intellectual Kelly. Kelly smiled and nodded. After greeting Melanie, she brought the 3 of them into the studio. The design of the angel outfit had been completed. The studio was renovated again at this time. A large catwalk that was more than 10 meters long and 5 meters wide was built in the middle. As the former chief editor of Vanity Fair, Tina Brown could not help but feel a little speechless when she saw the catwalk at first glance. One must know that the traditional catwalk was only more than 1 meter wide. Since Eric had created such an anti-traditional catwalk, it would definitely cause a controversy in the future. However, Tina Brown did not have any resistance in her heart. Instead, she was keenly aware that this catwalk would undoubtedly become a news point of the Victoria's Secret show. Unlike Tina Brown, Melanie, who was following behind Kelly and Tina Brown, was secretly sneaking glances at Kelly's graceful back. After a while, she pulled Carolyn lightly and moved a little further away from the 2 women in front of her. She moved closer to Carolyn's ear and whispered with a smile, "Carolyn, I dare to bet with you that that fellow definitely has that kind of relationship with his female assistant. I've heard that Kelly Haynes has already been divorced for a few years. However, she doesn't look like someone who hasn't had a male partner for a long time." Carolyn blushed and hit Melanie lightly. "You don't tell me such weird things. I don't want to hear it. Moreover, it's very impolite to talk about people behind their backs." Melanie deliberately dragged out her accent and sighed. She glanced at Carolyn's shy and timid look in disappointment. Kelly brought the 3 girls to the vicinity of the catwalk. There were only models wearing simple underwear walking on the catwalk in the rhythm of the rock music. Kelly pointed at Eric, who was standing not far away and watching the models walking on the catwalk while lowering his head to record something in his notebook from time to time. She said, "Eric is busy right now. Let's wait for a while." "Of course, no problem," Tina Brown nodded with a smile. However, her gaze was fixed on a young girl who was not considered tall but had a gorgeous catwalk on the catwalk. After a while, she seemed to have realized something and asked Kelly, "This seems to be a rock song. But why are there no lyrics?" Kelly explained, the BMG of the 6 themes of the Victoria's Secret show were all composed by Eric himself. Therefore, in order to keep it a secret, only the accompanying music will be used in the early rehearsal stage. Melanie, who had also noticed this problem, was a little surprised. "Miss Haynes, are you saying that all 6 songs were written by Eric? Mr. Williams himself?" "That's right." Kelly nodded her head proudly. Tina Brown and the other 2 had heard the stunning rock single New Divide, released by Eric before. After hearing Kelly's confirmation, they no longer doubted it. However, they were a little surprised in their hearts again. Is there anything that this guy doesn't know? Star. Chapter 654. After waiting patiently for almost an hour, Tina Brown had almost memorized the tune of the rock song that was being played repeatedly. Only then did the rehearsals on the runway stop. Kelly looked at the situation not far away and walked over with the 3 of them. Kelly regretted bringing Tina and the rest over as soon as she got closer because Eric was criticizing them without holding back. The entire song lasts for 3 minutes and 40 seconds, so the interval between each of you is 17 seconds and the total time you stay on the runway is 30 seconds. I'm not asking you to be 100% accurate, but the difference can't be more than 5 seconds. There were at least 5 of you who couldn't meet this requirement just now. Also, Cindy, Paulina, Tara, the 3 of you, don't continue to walk on the big intersection. Restrain your steps. I know that the big intersection has the best flat surface effect, but it definitely won't look good on the TV. Moreover, this kind of walk on the runway might make you fall down under the fast rhythm of the first BGM. If that really happens, the theme will definitely be re-recorded because of your mistakes. However, I definitely wouldn't mind playing the scene of you falling down on ABC. Eric talked for more than 5 minutes and lectured the group of perfect women who made the men stand on their feet like quails. Only then did he stop reluctantly and reached out his hand subconsciously. Kelly rolled her eyes and passed a bottle of mineral water to him. Only then did Eric notice Tina Brown, Carolyn, and Melanie behind him, who looked a little unnatural. Without changing his expression, Eric signaled them to wait. He drank a few mouthfuls of water and said to the models, "Okay, that's all for the morning. Diane, Cindy, Tara, the 3 of you go and change your clothes. We'll have lunch together later." The models quickly dispersed as if they were relieved of a burden. Eric turned around and hugged Tina Brown passionately and said, "Tina, have you been waiting for a long time?" Tina Brown smiled and shook her head. "It's nothing. It's just that the way you work is really impressive." Eric spread his hands and said, "You know, with my age, if I'm not strict, it's hard to make this group of beauties listen to me." Tina Brown knew Eric's other intention in doing that, but she did not expose him while smiling. Eric hugged Melanie Gleason again before walking up to little Carolyn. He teased, "Carolyn, I haven't seen you in a few months. You seem to have grown a little taller." Carolyn's face turned red as the tips of her shoes tapped on the floor. She was a little shy as she didn't know if she should take the initiative to admit that she was wearing high heels today. However, her small body had already been picked up by Eric, and was even weighed up like a little child. Eric only hugged her for a moment before placing her on the ground. He smiled and said, "You seem to have become lighter." Naturally, Carolyn wasn't repulsed by Eric's hug. However, when she saw the dozens of gazes directed at her, she immediately felt shy and didn't know what to do. She could only subconsciously reply to Eric's teasing, "No, it's still 96 pounds. Under the laughter from the surrounding, Carolyn realized that her answer was definitely terrible. 96 pounds is just right. However, a girl's weight is the same as her age. It's not suitable for you to casually tell others about it," Eric said. Seeing that Carolyn's face had turned even redder, he could only throw a glance at Kelly. Kelly lightly glared at Eric, who was bullying the little girl. She walked over and intimately held onto Carolyn's arm as she said, "Eric, you and Ms. Brown must have a lot of things to discuss. I'll bring Carolyn and Melanie to go through the employment procedures first." Seeing that Eric was about to leave, Carolyn raised her little face with a faint reluctance in her eyes. Eric considerately said, "I still have things to do in the afternoon. Can I treat you and Melanie to dinner tonight?" Carolyn subconsciously nodded her head. However, she felt that it wasn't reserved enough. She lowered her little head once again and left the studio with Kelly. After the three of them disappeared, Tina Brown said to Eric with a faint surprise in her tone, "This is the first time I've seen a situation where a girl's EQ becomes negative in front of a guy she likes." Eric shrugged and smiled. "I understand, Tina. You're definitely not praising me. But I'm not mocking you either. I'm just very curious. I had a great time with Carolyn along the way. This girl is perfect in every aspect," Tina Brown said and shook her head slightly. At this moment, the three spokespersons for Victoria's Secret, Diane Kruger, Cindy Crawford and Tyra Banks, who were ordered by Eric to stay, walked out of the changing room. The two of them did not continue the topic. "You must know the two of them," Eric pointed at Cindy Crawford and Tyra Banks, who had been famous for a long time. He only continued after watching Tina Brown hug the two girls familiarly, "This is Miss Diane Kruger from Germany." Tina Brown noticed this girl who looked a little young when she was waiting just now. She reached out her hand and said, "Nice to meet you, Diane. I'm Tina Brown. Your catwalk just now was amazing." Diane Kruger did not know about Tina Brown's recent situation. However, Tina Brown's title as the chief editor of Vanity Fair was very well known to her. After hearing Tina Brown's introduction, she was a little flattered and shook hands with her. "Nice to meet you, Miss Brown. I've also read Vanity Fair." Tina Brown smiled and said, "It's a pity that I'm no longer working at Vanity Fair magazine." Diane Kruger did not know what was going on. She was worried that her unintentional words would offend the other party, so she looked at Eric in confusion. Eric explained, "Tina is now the chief editor of Yahoo's portal website. You must know the Yahoo in Whopper, right?" Diane Kruger quickly nodded. "I know. I've been visiting this website often recently. There's a lot of great fashion information on it. Since the chief editor of the website is Miss Brown, then everything is normal." Tina Brown smiled faintly as a response to Diane Kruger's compliment. She then asked Eric, "Didn't you say that there are 5 spokespersons?" Christy Darrington and Linda Evangelista will be performing the opening of the last 2 themes respectively. "Today is just the preliminary rehearsal of the first theme," Eric explained and said, "It's already noon. Let's go to the restaurant. We can talk while walking." Looking at Eric and Tina Brown walking out side by side, Cindy Crawford and the other 2 girls still did not know why Eric called them along, but they still quickly followed behind the 2 quietly. "Eric, I've listened to that song many times just now. Kelly said that you wrote it personally. What's the name of it?" "My songs know what you did in the Ark." "Hee. Isn't the name a little long?" Tina Brown smiled and said, "It's a very interesting name. However, since you wrote it personally, I'm guessing it must be as good as New Divide. Why don't you try to hit the charts in advance? This will definitely bring more attention to the Victoria's Secret show." No matter before or after the Victoria's Secret show, the focus of the publicity will be on the big show itself, especially for Diane and the other spokespersons. "I don't want the limelight of this annual show to be stolen by a few songs in advance. This is not in line with the proposed publicity strategy. When the popularity of the Victoria's Secret show begins to subside, Firefly Records will promote the singers and groups with background music at the right time. This way, we can continue the topic of Victoria's Secret." Tina Brown nodded with some understanding. The 3 girls who were following behind the 2 of them silently were a little confused. However, they were still a little excited by the part where Eric emphasized recommending their spokespersons. Of course, Cindy Crawford and Tyra Banks glanced at Diane Kruger, who was specifically mentioned by Eric with jealousy. Although after a few months of intensive training, Diane Kruger's originally somewhat mediocre walk had shown great improvement. She had vaguely reached the standard of walking out of the stage that Eric required. However, in the eyes of Cindy Crawford and Tyra Banks, Diane Kruger's status in the modeling circle was still at the rookie level. Of course, the most famous Cindy Crawford also looked down on Tyra Banks. This was because many people knew that Tyra Banks got the position of spokesperson because the big sister of the African supermodel, Naomi Campbell, took the initiative to give up the opportunity. On the other hand, it was also because of Victoria's Secret's proper consideration. Eric knew that the level of scheming in the modeling circle was even higher than in Hollywood. However, as long as these models did not affect the production progress of the Victoria's Secret show, he did not care about these things. According to the data collected by Ian and the others, by 1995, the number of Internet users in North America will increase to about 25 million. The number of Internet users outside of North America will also probably reach this number. With the Internet already popularized all over the world and Yahoo's strong market performance, it can almost be said that the entire Internet English circle is Yahoo's territory. This part of the users will be about 30 million. Of course, Yahoo will also choose to expand in Japan, Korea, and other overseas countries at the right time. However, what we're going to discuss today is still the matter of further expanding the influence of Yahoo through the Victoria's Secret show. After dinner, Eric started to talk about business with Tina. I remember that you used the incident of Prince Charles marrying Princess Diana very successfully to activate the old British magazine, Gossip. The rise of Vanity Fair was also due to the incident of Mr. and Mrs. Reagan dancing the foxtrot. Therefore, I'm sure you're more experienced than me in how to use the topic of the Victoria's Secret show to increase Yahoo's influence, right? Tina Brown smiled and nodded. She handed a prepared document to Eric and said, "This is the preliminary plan that I came up with based on some of the information that you sent me. However, the information that you gave me before was not very complete, so I didn't do some things in detail." Eric looked through the plan patiently. Initially, he wanted to tell Tina Brown about the Internet hype in the later generations. However, Tina Brown's plan covered almost all aspects of the Internet hype in the later generations. Eric could not help but feel that he really could not underestimate the wisdom of the ancients. In the plan, Tina Brown not only listed how to gradually release news on the portal in the early stages of the Victoria's Secret show, but she also planned to use the Yahoo forum to attract netizens to interact with each other after the Victoria's Secret show. She even came up with a plan to select the most popular supermodel through online voting. Noticing that Eric's expression became a little strange, Tina Brown asked worriedly, "Eric, what do you think?" "Of course, it's very detailed." Eric nodded in satisfaction and asked again, "Oh yeah, have you discussed the technical feasibility of these plans with Ian and the rest?" "We have." Tina Brown nodded affirmatively. "The other few projects are not too difficult. Steve's team has recently optimized the compression algorithm of the GIF image again. With the current average network speed, Yahoo's web page can open an image of about 20 centimeters in length and width within 2 seconds. Moreover, the image quality is very good. There's also the voting system. I'm worried that Steve will delay this, so I specially asked Ian to be responsible for developing this system. We will definitely be able to launch it as soon as possible after the Victoria's Secret show in December. Moreover, if the results prove to be very good, we can also reuse this voting system for other projects. Tina Brown's words were very general. Although Eric did not see the prototype of this voting system, he suddenly thought of another famous social media website that suddenly rose to prominence with the help of the voting system. However, it seemed that now was not the time to launch FB. Eric could only shake his head and forget about it for the time being. He pointed at the 3 girls who had been ignored for a while and said, "Regarding the topics you need to talk about, you can talk to the 3 of them alone later. I think you will definitely continue to stay in Los Angeles for a few more days. After that, you can also take some time to contact Christy and Linda. However, there's one thing that I hope you can control when it comes to their press releases." Seeing that Tina Brown nodded, Eric looked at Cindy Crawford and the other 2 girls with a warning look. "You guys also need to pay attention to these things. I don't care what your private life is like, but before the Victoria's Secret show, I definitely don't want to see any messy news about you guys appearing on the tabloids. Of course, I won't interfere with your normal relationship." Even if Eric did not remind them like this, Most of the models who wanted to take this opportunity to hook up with some super rich guy would not have any messy news. Cindy Crawford and Tyra Banks of course nodded their heads meaninglessly to agree. Diane Kruger hesitated for a moment and nodded her head obediently. Eric thought for a while and looked at Cindy Crawford, saying, "Also, it's best not to get into a relationship with someone who is too bad for your style. I hope your relationship with someone who is more positive and sunny." Chapter 655. Hearing Eric's words, Tina Brown lowered her head slightly and picked up the coffee in front of her to cover her expression as if nothing had happened. Tyra Banks and Diane Kruger were almost gloating at the same time. However, the two girls were very smart. They noticed Tina Brown's action and immediately picked up the coffee. Cindy Crawford, who was extremely embarrassed, just wanted to pour all the coffee in front of her on the hateful guy's face. "Just you wait, you bastard. One day, I'll make you pay the price," Cindy Crawford thought in her heart, but it didn't stop her delicate face from showing an innocent and resentful expression. She looked at Eric like an injured Persian cat. This was one of Eric's weaknesses that Cindy Crawford accidentally discovered a few days ago. That day when she checked the training results of the models for the first time, there was a girl who always looked at her feet when walking on the runway. She was scolded by Eric several times. When the girl walked on the runway again crying, Eric immediately stopped scolding her. Instead, he specifically asked the trainer to patiently guide the girl on how to get rid of the weakness of always looking down. Eric didn't know that he had become the target of this seductive scheme. Seeing that Cindy Crawford not only didn't fight back or defend herself, but also had an expression of "you hurt me" and you let it go with a smile, he suddenly felt a little embarrassed. The night between Cindy Crawford and O'Neill that made people feel very broken should have happened during this time in the original spacetime. However, now the timeline had been messed up by Eric. Cindy Crawford had been living in Los Angeles for the past few months for physical training. Eric didn't hear any news about the contact between the two. However, Eric was too lazy to take back what he said. Anyway, Cindy Crawford wasn't innocent before. Tina Brown felt that the situation was a little awkward. Seeing that Eric didn't continue to say anything, she took the initiative to smooth things over. "Eric, I have an appointment with Mr. Katzenberg at 2:30 in the afternoon to talk about some details of the cooperation between Yahoo and Firefly. Before that, can I ask you some questions as the editor-in-chief of Yahoo?" Eric realized that Tina Brown was definitely not saying this on a whim. However, Eric really appreciated this kind of work behavior. Moreover, as the boss of Yahoo, Eric did not mind providing some exclusive news for his own online media. Therefore, he nodded without hesitation and said, "Of course, feel free to ask any questions." As expected, Tina Brown was prepared. After Eric nodded in agreement, she quickly took out her notebook from her briefcase. Without wasting any time, she immediately asked her first question. "Eric, Firefly still insisted on reforming Disney's animation department after the release of The Lion King. Apart from the reasons that were announced earlier, does Firefly have any deeper strategic considerations?" Eric did not expect Tina Brown's first question to be so accurate. Now, almost everyone in the outside world was guessing the real reason why Firefly insisted on selling the hand-drawn animation department. There were all kinds of insider analysis, but no one had hit the nail on the head. After being the queen of media for so many years, it was not surprising that Tina Brown was acutely aware of this topic that was full of topics. Eric said honestly, "Yes, but this involves Firefly's internal secrets, so I can't say." Tina Brown smiled and nodded. She drew a cross in front of the first question. After thinking for a while, she changed the cross into a question mark. She looked up and said, "If that's the case, Eric, can Yahoo invite a professional analyst to do a review based on your answer?" After a pause, Tina Brown added, "I mean, after the animation department is auctioned off." "No problem," Eric nodded. Both of them understood that this was just a gimmick article to earn clicks. The real reason why Firefly abolished the hand-drawn animation department could only be deduced from the decline of 2D animation a few years later. Therefore, Eric was not worried that the analyst hired by Yahoo would be able to analyze the inside story based on his affirmative answer. Then the second question, Tina Brown asked again. Now, many people want to know about the sequel of Men in Black. It's rumored in the industry that Firefly refused to restart the sequel of Men in Black in the short term. Is it really because they want to monopolize the copyright of Men in Black? Eric smiled. Tina, you're really bold with this question. Boss, I didn't bring my interview recorder. Tina Brown changed the way she addressed him intentionally and explained with a smile. Eric knew that Tina Brown said that to show that his answer would not appear on the website as it was. Moreover, he also felt that Tina Brown was testing whether he could accept the negative news about Firefly Group appearing on Yahoo News. As a mass media platform with great development prospects, Yahoo's credibility would definitely be affected if the news about Firefly Group was all positive news. The real inside story is like this, Eric thought about it and said. After the success of the first Men in Black, the lead actors, directors, and producers including Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones, and the rest requested for a huge increase in pay and share. If Firefly and Columbia agreed to it, then we'd have to pay a total of $35 million and 30% of the profit share for the creators of the sequel. The production cost of the sequel would reach $1 billion USD. Including the huge distribution and marketing costs in the later stages, the total cost of the project might be close to $200 million USD. Eric paused as he spoke up to this point. He patiently waited for Tina Brown to record the data before continuing. Although the total global box office of the first Men in Black was close to $600 million USD, according to the rule that sequels often can't surpass the first movie, Firefly's estimate of the box office of the Men in Black sequel is $200 million USD in North America and $200 million overseas. If that's the case, the company can only get back $140 million USD in terms of the box office according to the average ratio between the North American and international box office. Currently, Hollywood's box office usually accounts for 1/3 of the total revenue. In other words, Firefly and Columbia would get back $2 billion USD in terms of the distribution of videotapes and peripherals in the next few years. Around $800 million USD. Not to mention the long time cost during this period, the total profit of the entire sequel after mining all the profit points is $2 billion USD. $200 million USD. That's $2 billion USD. 30% of the $200 million USD will be given to the creators. That's another $66 million USD. Then, in the entire movie, the few creators who only participated in the shooting of the movie would take away more than $100 million USD in revenue. The two major movie companies, Firefly and Columbia, who invested countless manpower and resources in the production, marketing, and distribution of the movie, would only get $1 billion USD. $500 million USD. And that's split between the two companies. Tina, do you think Firefly needs to develop a sequel under such circumstances? Tina Brown smiled and shook her head. According to Eric's analysis, Firefly and Columbia would basically be working for the few creators if they started to film a sequel. It was obviously not worth it. Diane Kruger and Tyra Banks listened to Eric casually talk about the inside story of these Hollywood blockbusters. While their curiosity was satisfied, they could not help but have some doubts. However, the two girls knew very well that they did not make any comments. Cindy Crawford, who realized that her trump card just now worked, asked, fearlessly, "Why don't you develop a sequel? Although the lead actors get more profit, Firefly still makes money, doesn't it?" Eric just rolled his eyes at the woman and did not intend to explain at all. He picked up his coffee and sipped it. Tina Brown wrote down some of the data that Eric said and said to Cindy Crawford with a smile, "Cindy, let me give you an example. If you start a company in the future and hire a CEO to manage it for you, this company can make $10 million USD a year. However, you realize that the CEO's annual salary is almost $10 million USD as well. Under such circumstances, would you still be willing to hire him?" Cindy Crawford opened her mouth and wanted to argue. However, she realized that if it were her, she would definitely kick that CEO out and replace him with a manager whose annual salary was lower than $1 million USD. "Of course you wouldn't," Tina Brown said as she watched the change in Cindy Crawford's expression. "The current situation of Men in Black is similar to the CEO that I just mentioned. This CEO can only bring in $10 million USD of profit for the company, but he has to take away $10 million USD of annual salary. No company would allow this to happen. Of course, the Hollywood movie companies in reality would definitely be different. If it was MGM or Columbia, they would face losses if they did not start the sequel of Men in Black. They could only pay a high salary for the main creators. However, Firefly, who had more choices, didn't need to do that. This was because there was also the issue of time and cost involved. The movie schedule was limited every year. Firefly would definitely choose a project with a higher profit margin, such as this year's Lion King. This animation would bring in $1 billion of profit for Firefly in the next few years. However, if they changed the schedule of Lion King to the sequel of Men in Black, Firefly's final profit might not even reach $100 million. Eric, am I right? Tina Brown looked at Eric when she said the last sentence. Eric nodded. I have to say, Tina, your comprehension is amazing. Tina Brown smiled politely and said, Thank you for your affirmation, Eric. However, if it wasn't for your data just now, I definitely wouldn't have been able to analyze this. However, do you think I should publish this data on Yahoo News? This topic is likely to cause the hostility of Hollywood stars towards Firefly. The problem of Hollywood stars' inflated pay needs to be solved eventually. Otherwise, it will affect the future development of Hollywood. When you go to Firefly's headquarters later, you can also ask Katzenberg to provide you with some information. He had hoped that Hollywood stars' pay would return to rationality since a few years ago. So, take the opportunity to make a special topic on this topic. Firefly's main movies in recent years have not relied on superstars, and they won't in the future. So, Eric shrugged and said, I'm not worried about their hostility at all. Tina Brown nodded slightly excitedly. She realized that this topic would definitely cause a heated discussion. The corresponding section of Yahoo News would also increase its attention because of this heated discussion. The sense of accomplishment brought by this effect was similar to the increase in sales of the magazines she managed before. With this matter in mind, Tina Brown hurriedly finished asking the remaining few questions. She left Cindy Crawford and the other two women's business cards and agreed to discuss the matter of creating hype for them on the internet at night. Then, she hurriedly left Firefly Cineplex. Although Tina Brown was in Los Angeles, the topic of discussing Hollywood stars' inflated pay landed on the front page of Yahoo's portal the next day. The entire topic section used the delay of the sequel of Men in Black as the lead. Through a number of very professional articles, it discussed in detail the reasons for the inflated pay of Hollywood stars and the various impacts it had brought to Hollywood in recent years. Although the discussion of Hollywood stars' high pay due to various bundling strategies had never stopped since Michael Ovitz created CAA, the topic this time was far more popular than any previous time under the full support of Firefly and Tina Brown's effective operation. The related articles on Yahoo's portal were republished by more than 300 newspapers and media in North America and Europe in just a few days. Subsequently, the four major film companies, Firefly, Fox, Columbia, and MGM, immediately issued a statement saying that they would gradually adjust the company's production strategy to improve the current situation of excessive pay for leading actors. Although Warner Brothers, Paramount, and Universal were not members of the Firefly Alliance, they quickly issued a similar statement under the circumstances of having the same interests. The unified statement of the 7 major film companies immediately caused a huge shock in the industry. The Screen Actors Association jumped out immediately and said that if the 7 major film companies were to reduce the pay of actors, the Screen Actors Association would resist by going on strike. Some of the actors who were stirred up also showed signs of being ready to take an instant vacation at any time. In the face of this situation, Yahoo News immediately issued a rebuttal article, saying that the strategy of the 7 major film companies to reduce costs was only targeted at a small number of stars with inflated pay and not most of the ordinary actors. The Screen Actors Association was obviously controlled by a part of the interest class and was misleading the public in this way. In Hollywood, which had just experienced a successful summer season at the box office, no one wanted to see a strike. Firefly and several other major film companies quickly clarified that they would not reduce the pay of ordinary actors. Not only that, with the overall expansion of the Hollywood film industry, the income of ordinary actors would gradually increase instead of decrease. Therefore, the ordinary actors were appeased, but the superstars at the top of the Hollywood pyramid were immediately unwilling. Chapter 656. In 1994, the members of the American Society of Film and Television Actors, SAG, had reached more than 120,000 members. More than 99% of the members' annual income was basically the same as that of the working class. Only less than 1% at the top of the pyramid could live a glamorous life in Hollywood. While enjoying generous remuneration, this group of people also held a large part of the power in Hollywood. When the 7 major film companies publicly announced that they would reduce the remuneration of top superstars, these top superstars quickly formed an alliance under the collaboration of the Actors Association and several major agencies. Almost on the same day that the 7 major film companies issued the statement, a group of top superstars, including Harrison Ford, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Cruise, Mel Gibson, Bruce Willis, and other Hollywood superstars with a salary of more than $10 million, immediately cut off all film projects that they were negotiating with the 7 major film companies. Some of the spokespersons of the top superstars also threatened to refuse to cooperate with the promotion of the films that had already been shot. After the news came out, the entire Hollywood was in an uproar again. In recent years, although CG special effects films that relied less on superstars had begun to rise, the films that accounted for more than half of Hollywood's box office revenue were still inseparable from the participation of these superstars. The unified behavior of these A-list superstars was almost as impactful as the actors and actresses who stopped working. The first to be affected by the suspension of the A-list superstars was undoubtedly Time Warner, which had been following the superstar route since the Steve Ross era. Warner had just experienced a bleak summer, and the CEO, Terry Semel, had been living in fear and trepidation recently. But as the projects that Warner was negotiating with Robert De Niro, Kevin Costner, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and others, such as Thief of Fire, Future Waterworld, and Secret Order of Evaporation, were put on hold, Terry Semel was once again attacked by shareholders and competitors. Some projects of several major film companies, such as Universal, Paramount, and Fox, were also greatly affected by this incident. The situation of film companies was very different from that of stars. Even if the A-list superstars did not make movies for a year or two, they could still live comfortably with their previous remuneration. But film companies could not stop production for a year or two for no reason. Without continuous hot films, the film companies would soon face serious problems such as a sharp decline in revenue and a breakdown in the capital chain. When some of the executives of the film companies who were in a dilemma turned their attention to Firefly, they found that Firefly's film companies were basically unaffected. Firefly's 2 films at the end of the year, Face and Runaway Bride, had basically been completed. Needless to say, Runaway Bride starring Julia Roberts. Although Nicolas Cage, an A-list superstar, had participated in Face, since the film was already completed, it would not have much impact on the film's release. Even if Cage completely disregarded his old relationship with Eric and Firefly, he would not have much impact on the release of the film. Following that, the 2 movies, Jurassic Park 2 and Lone Ranger Day, that were released next year were both blockbusters with special effects. Even Will Smith in Lone Ranger Day was just a newcomer to Hollywood when he signed the contract. The other 3D animated movie, Toy Story 2, did not need anyone to act in it at all, so it was not affected at all. Moreover, Firefly's films, such as The Matrix and Titanic, which were in the preparation stage, were still focused on CG special effects. Although Firefly had also contacted some A-list superstars, judging from Firefly's previous films, even if there were no superstars involved, Firefly did not seem to be too worried about the film's quality and box office. After the executives of several other major film companies discovered this, they envied Firefly's production strategy that was not tied down by superstars. At the same time, they could not help but have a thought in their minds. Were they tricked by Eric Williams? Otherwise, why did you stir up trouble and make everyone fall into the abyss of suffering, but you yourself are fine? Conspiracy theories were always very easy to accept. When some people thought about it, the more they felt that this was a big trap dug by Eric, they did not want to continue to insist. The 2 sides were in a deadlock for less than a week. Terry Semel of Warner Brothers was the first to compromise because of the pressure from all parties. He publicly stated at a press conference that Warner had always maintained a good cooperative relationship with Hollywood stars and would continue to maintain close and mutually beneficial cooperation in the future. Although Terry Semel did not directly say that Warner would not reduce the salary of stars, no one was stupid enough to not understand the meaning of Terry Semel's words. The Superstar Alliance also knew the strategy of striking with a stick and giving with a carrot. After Warner first gave in, the negotiations for projects such as Thief of Fire, Future Waterworld, and Secret Order of Evaporation were immediately restarted. The two parties announced the official signing of several major film projects almost a day after Terry Semmel's statement. Following Warner's compromise, Universal, Paramount, and even Fox, Columbia, and several other companies also made compromises either openly or secretly. Firefly Group was the only one that remained silent. In the Steeple Manor, Nicole, who had just taken a shower, walked into the bedroom wrapped in a light pink silk nightgown. She walked barefooted across the slightly cold floor and jumped onto the bed. "I really don't understand why you don't like the carpet in the bedroom. It's very comfortable to step on," Nicole said as she pecked Eric's face affectionately a few times while he was leaning against the headboard, reading a document. Eric didn't even raise his head as he said, "The carpet costs money." Nicole rolled her eyes and suddenly smiled again. She said, "Are you still disappointed that your conspiracy didn't succeed? You're thinking too much. I didn't have much hope, so I'm not disappointed." Nicole stared at Eric's face for a few seconds and said, "You're not disappointed, I can see it." Eric smiled and handed a document to Nicole. He said, "Here, take a look." Nicole curiously took the document. When she saw the dense data and charts, she suddenly lost interest and threw it to Eric. She said, "Just tell me what it is, I don't understand." "This is the internal data and statistics of Yahoo. The industry is very curious about Yahoo's operations. If you take this document out, even if you offer $100,000, people will rush to buy it." Nicole pretended to be surprised. She covered her mouth and said, "Wow, that's amazing." Eric glanced at Nicole's seductive figure as her pajamas slid down her shoulders. He smiled and said, "You're so big. It's not cute at all to pretend to be a little girl." Nicole pouted at Eric and pulled up her pajamas. She said, "You're so unromantic. Are you not interested in me because you've been with those beautiful models for too long?" "I'll definitely teach you a lesson later," Eric said with a smirk. "But since you came here today to find out what I'm thinking, I should satisfy your curiosity first, right?" Nicole blushed and admitted, "I'm not interested in these things, but Hanks and the others want to know what you're thinking, so they asked me to ask. My thoughts are basically all published on Yahoo. In the end, it's about making Hollywood stars' salaries rational. That's it." Nicole tilted her head curiously. She asked, "What kind of salary do you think is rational?" Eric thought for a while and said, "A star's salary should not exceed 20% of a film's profits. That's reasonable. When I say rational, I don't mean reducing the actors' salaries. I want the stars to share the risks with the studio. Just like how I suggested you use your salary to become a shareholder in The Mummy. Although you can get more than $30 million now, it's still reasonable because Universal's profit from this project will reach $400 million, and you only get 8% of it. Last summer, Schwarzenegger and Stallone both got $17 million for their two action films. Although it's much less than yours, those two films not only did not make a profit, but also brought tens of millions of US dollars of losses to the studio. That's very unreasonable. Your idea seems very difficult to realize. The risk of film investment is so high. Before a film is released, no one knows whether it will be a success or failure. There are not many A-list stars who are willing to take risks just to get dividends. If the film doesn't make a profit, they'll have worked for nothing. That's why," Eric shrugged. "I didn't have high expectations for this matter. I just needed to control Firefly's budget." Nicole was puzzled. "But you offended all the A-list stars in Hollywood this time. Even if Hanks and Cage, who are close to Firefly, didn't say anything, they must have something against you in their hearts. Since you know it's impossible to succeed, why did you do it?" Eric waved the information he just handed to Nicole and said, "Because of this incident, Yahoo's daily traffic in the past week is close to 10 million. Although it will fall later, I believe that after the Victoria's Secret show at the end of the year, Yahoo's daily traffic will remain above 10 million next year. Do you know what this means?" Nicole's eyes widened. She shook her head and said in a cute tone, "I don't know. Let's put it this way. We can simply compare Yahoo's portal to a newspaper. Some time ago, Firefly sold 15% of the newspaper and magazine assets acquired from ABC Group. $200 million. The total sales of these newspapers and magazines added up to less than 2 million copies. Then, you can calculate, how much is a Yahoo portal with 10 million subscriptions worth? Nicole's mathematics was obviously not that good. Her eyes flickered a few times before she said in disbelief, $6 billion. It can't be that much, right? In the original spacetime, Yahoo, which was just a very simple directory website, had a market value of $500 million on its first day of listing. Now, Yahoo had a series of very popular online products such as Yahoo Browser, Yahoo Chat Software, Yahoo Portal, and Yahoo Email. Its traffic was even more than 10 streets of Yahoo in the original world. Coupled with the two very promising development plans of Yahoo Technology Alliance and Yahoo Advertising Alliance, the market value of Yahoo's IPO next year, even if it did not reach $6 billion, it would definitely not be too far off. Nothing is impossible. You'll know next year. Nicole's mouth was still slightly open. Doesn't that mean that you'll have billions more in assets next year? Eric said, when the Rockefeller family's assets were at their peak, it reached 1/60th of the US GDP. I think I should at least surpass them in the future. Nicole subconsciously asked, how much is 1/60th? Eric thought for a while and said, the Federation's current GDP is $7.3 trillion. 1/60th is 120 billion. 120 billion, 120 billion. Nicole muttered a few words. Suddenly, as if she had lost all her strength, she fell softly on the table. Eric threw away the folder in his hand and moved closer to Nicole. He brushed a strand of blonde hair away from Nicole's face and smiled. Do you feel that it's difficult to breathe? Do you need me to give you mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? Nicole reached out and pushed Eric's head away. She said, I was proud of earning $30 million from the mummy for a long time. Now that you've said that, I'm not in the mood anymore. Eric laughed. Don't people always say that women conquer the world by conquering men? I think you should be more ambitious. Nicole said bitterly, I've never been able to guess what you're thinking, but I also know that you have no intention of getting married. Moreover, you already have 2 children. I don't know what will happen between us. Sometimes, when I think about it, I feel that I should stay far away from you. Eric leaned over and kissed Nicole's lips. He reached out and took off the silver necklace around her neck. He opened the heart-shaped pendant and saw a rose-colored ring lying quietly inside. Nicole looked at Eric with soft eyes. She picked up her left hand and put the ring on her ring finger. There was a hint of expectation in her eyes. She said, Are you proposing to me? Eric shook his head. Before Nicole could show a disappointed expression, he said, No, a proposal should be put on the middle finger. If you put it on the ring finger, it means that you're already my wife. Nicole raised her arm and looked at the ruby on the ring under the light. She said, No proposal, no wedding. What's worse is that this ring isn't the only one. You want to have me like this? Humph, don't even think about it. Eric said, If you're not afraid of being affected by Yu Luan, I can arrange a wedding for you at any time. Nicole's eyes lit up, but she immediately asked, Then, what about them? If you want it, they will definitely ask for it. Nicole immediately wrinkled her nose in dissatisfaction. Do you want to marry again? The laws of the world are only to restrict people who can be restricted. With my will, I can have many wives. Nicole's eyes flashed. I think that maybe you can join the Mormon religion. That would make it more legitimate. Eric held Nicole's face and kissed it fiercely. He said, I just said that with my will, I can have many wives. I don't need the affirmation of external things, whether it's the federal laws or God in heaven. Therefore, I won't join the Mormon religion for the affirmation of the secular world. That would be deceiving myself. Chapter 657. After the heart bypass surgery, although Michael Eisner was repeatedly advised by his family and doctors to rest, he was already sitting in his office at Worldwide headquarters at 7 o'clock in the morning. Because at 10 o'clock in the morning, Firefly would officially auction its hand-drawn animation department at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. Michael Eisner turned on the brand-new IBM desktop computer on his desk and quickly clicked on the top link on Yahoo's entertainment page. He read the detailed list of assets of the animation department that was about to be auctioned with mixed feelings. Until now, Michael Eisner still clearly remembered that in 1986, under the suggestion of the head of the home entertainment department, Bill Mechanic, the management began to release classic Disney animated films under pressure from all parties. Before that, whether it was the industry or Disney itself, the valuation of Disney's film library, which had hundreds of films, was only $200 million. But then, Disney tried to release the 1940 Pinocchio videotape for the first time. Although they spent a high marketing cost of $7 million, 7 million boxes of this animated film were sold within a year, with sales reaching $51 million. The sales of the following animated films, such as Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella, all exceeded the valuation of Disney's film library of $200 million. Michael Eisner, who witnessed the rise of Disney's 2D animated films in the late 1980s, felt that he knew the value of Disney's animated films better than anyone else. When Firefly threw out the news of selling the animation department, after confirming that it was not fake news, Michael Eisner's first thought was to buy it at all costs. Even if the box office of The Lion King did not explode, Michael Eisner felt that he should do the same. However, the reaction of Panasonic, the parent company of Worldwide, poured a bucket of cold water on Michael Eisner's head. Panasonic's desire to enter the entertainment industry was not so enthusiastic from beginning to end. When they followed Sony to buy Universal, they were completely worried that they would be left behind by their competitors in the electronics industry. In the past few years, Panasonic had found that buying a Hollywood film company did not have an obvious effect on the promotion of their electronic products. The Japanese also realized that from the beginning, they were severely tricked by Hollywood. Compared to Sony, Panasonic did not want to continue managing Worldwide. They would not fork out more than $1 or $2 billion for an animation department. Michael Eisner, who was unwilling to give up, had flown to Japan 3 times in a row in the past month, but he had not been able to get any support from Panasonic. However, things soon took a turn for the better. The success of The Mummy brought Worldwide very good financial results. Panasonic planned to take advantage of this opportunity to cash in on Worldwide. Coincidentally, the Seagram Group from Canada also expressed their desire to enter Hollywood at the same time. The two sides quickly entered the stage of secret negotiations. As the head of Universal, Michael Eisner was naturally part of the negotiation. During this process, Michael Eisner realized that the CEO of the Seagram Group, Edgar Bronfman, had a strong interest in the media industry, so he took the opportunity to persuade Edgar Bronfman to buy Disney's animation department before he took over Universal. Encouraged by the success of The Lion King, Edgar Bronfman did not hesitate and agreed. Time passed unknowingly. The secretary knocked on the door and pulled Michael Eisner out of his thoughts. "Mr. Eisner, Mr. Bronfman is here." Michael Eisner stood up and tidied his suit. He showed a professional smile and went up to greet him. At the same time, a tall middle-aged man with a beard and glasses walked in. After greeting each other warmly, Michael Eisner said, "Then, Edgar, let's go now." Edgar Bronfman hesitated and said, "Michael, don't we need to wait for Mr. Ovitz?" Michael Eisner shook his head slightly and said, "Edgar, if you are sure that you want to buy Universal, maybe we need to find time to talk about Michael in detail. But today, let's focus on Disney's animation department." Edgar Bronfman realized from Michael Eisner's expression that the recent news about the relationship between Michael Eisner and Michael Ovitz, who had been friends for decades, breaking up was true. However, after Eisner said that, Edgar Bronfman did not mention Michael Ovitz anymore. The two of them took a car and rushed to the Beverly Hilton Hotel. They spent a sweet night together. Although Nicole really wanted to attend the animation department's auction with Eric, she had to fly to New York with her agent, Pi Kingsley, early in the morning to discuss a film contract. After The Mummy, Nicole planned to film an indie film before the filming of the sequel to The Mummy began. She wanted to hone her acting skills and get nominated, so as to improve her image in the eyes of the film critics. Eric considerately sent Nicole to the plane personally before rushing to the Beverly Hilton Hotel. After getting out of the car in the parking lot, Eric saw Kelly rushing over with a blue folder. He said, "I'm so sorry, Kelly. Something came up." Kelly smelled the faint perfume on Eric's body. Although her expression did not change, she could not help but say, "You are my boss. You don't have to apologize to me." Eric did not expect his usually intelligent and capable female assistant to have a jealous side to her. He wanted to take a step forward and hug Kelly's waist to comfort her. However, a black Cadillac drove into the parking lot. Kelly, who was shocked by Eric's action, rebuked him and took a step back. Just as she was about to complain, a few people got out of the Cadillac and walked towards Eric. "Eric, long time no see." Michael Eisner walked over and took the initiative to shake hands with Eric. He introduced the middle-aged man beside him. "This is Edgar Bronfman, the CEO of Canada's Seagram Group." Eric had already read the relevant information of the bidders, so he was not unfamiliar with them. He warmly extended his hand and greeted, "Hello, Mr. Bronfman. Mr. Williams, nice to meet you." Edgar Bronfman shook hands with Eric with a smile on his face. However, he felt a little strange in his heart, especially when he addressed this young man who was 20 years younger than him as Mr. Williams. This strange feeling was even stronger. Due to the difference in status between the buyer and seller, Michael Eisner and Edgar Bronfman took the lead to leave after chatting for a while. Looking at the two of them leaving with their entourage, Kelly smiled and said to Eric, "You always make people feel uncomfortable when they see you for the first time." Eric knew that Kelly was talking about Edgar Bronfman's reaction just now, so he just smiled. The Bronfman family that owned the Seagram Group took advantage of the business opportunities brought about by the American Prohibition in the 1920s and 1930s to rise rapidly in Canada. Although they were still in the brewing business, they had developed into a diversified and comprehensive group. Edgar Bronfman was the third generation of the Bronfman family after they made it big. He was in charge of the family business worth tens of billions of dollars. However, in front of Eric, this third-generation rich could not find any sense of superiority at all. Recalling Edgar Bronfman's appearance, Eric asked curiously, "Is Edgar Bronfman Jewish?" "Yes." Kelly nodded. Bronfman, a standard Jewish surname. Seagram Group hasn't taken over Universal yet, but they're already eyeing Disney's animation department. Adding these two together, it's very likely that they'll need $10 billion in cash. Panasonic and Firefly will only accept cash payments. As Eric spoke, his tone became mysterious. He leaned in front of Kelly and said, "Hey, do you think there's some Freemasonry or other organization behind this that's trying to invade Hollywood?" Kelly rolled her eyes at Eric and said, "Seagram Group bought 24% of DuPont in 1981. In April this year, DuPont launched an equity repurchase agreement and finally bought the DuPont shares held by Seagram Group for $9 billion. This is the source of funds for their acquisition of Universal and the animation department." Eric looked at his watch and brought Kelly to the elevator in the underground parking lot. He said, $9 billion. Why can't they do something else? For an outsider like them, buying a movie company is really too stupid. However, Kelly didn't quite agree with Eric's point of view. With the movie market's average annual growth rate of 9%, after Seagram buys Universal, even if they can't continue doing it, they can still turn a profit by selling it. Eric thought about it and felt that what Kelly said made sense. He remembered that, in the original Space-Time, a few years after Seagram bought Universal, he sold it to the French Vivendi Group again because of various problems. Vivendi played with it for a few years but still couldn't manage it, so they sold it to General Electric. However, although they didn't achieve any outstanding results, at that time, Universal wasn't reduced to the state of MGM. Plus, with Michael Eisner in control now, if Seagram couldn't continue playing, it didn't seem like they would lose too much. However, if this time Seagram, under Michael Eisner's urging, forcefully used a huge amount of money to buy Disney's hand-drawn animation department, then the future situation would definitely be different. Universal was still different from companies like Paramount and Time Warner. Universal and its parent company, MCA, were both foreign companies now and in the future. According to federal law, just the fact that foreigners couldn't own an American television station limited Universal's development into a comprehensive media group. This also meant that Universal's ability to resist risks would be far weaker than big companies like Firefly, Paramount, and Time Warner. If they got the hand-drawn animation department, which was destined to be in trouble, Universal would almost certainly stumble in this area in the next few years. Plus, the music industry would be impacted by the internet. It was not impossible for Universal to fall into the same predicament as MGM. Kelly seemed to have thought of the same thing as Eric. She asked curiously, "Eric, which company do you hope will get the animation department today?" "Paramount. I don't want Time Warner to decline so quickly. I still hope that Time Warner can continue to compete with Firefly for a few more years. Of course, in the end, whoever gets the hand-drawn animation department will be a good thing for Firefly. This means that one of our competitors will be in big trouble because of this burden." As the two talked, they soon arrived at a conference room in the Hilton Hotel. Katzenberg, who was about to personally host the auction, was holding a document and muttering. When he saw Eric and Kelly come in, he just nodded and greeted them. Eric chatted with Frank Wales and several other executives for a while. It was almost 10 o'clock. Eric and the others left the conference room and walked into the auction hall. Although the media reporters were blocked outside the auction hall, more than half of the hundreds of seats in the hall were still filled. Eric greeted the Hollywood giants who came to participate in the auction or purely to join in the fun. Then, he took Frank Wales and others to sit in the back row. At 10 o'clock, Katzenberg walked to the auction stage in high spirits. When the whispers below the stage quieted down, Katzenberg said into the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's auction. As you all know, the 2D animated film, The Lion King, released on June 24 this year has now achieved 6% worldwide. The astonishing box office of $700 million is very exciting news for the entire Hollywood. This means that the animation film market in Hollywood will once again usher in a new era. However, in consideration of the internal strategic development of the Firefly Group, we have regretfully decided to sell the entire hand-drawn animation department." After a simple opening speech, Katzenberg continued, "Although everyone has received a detailed asset catalog, allow me to briefly introduce it to everyone. In addition to the listed assets that will be auctioned, the Firefly Group has also temporarily decided to extend the original one-year payment date to 3 years in order to reduce the short-term financial pressure of the buyer as much as possible." As soon as Katzenberg's words fell, the originally quiet hall immediately buzzed with noise. This news was too sudden. All the bidders did not expect Firefly to do this. Of course, the purpose of Firefly was not difficult to guess. Leaving enough time for the buyer to pay meant that these buyers were likely to offer a higher price. An old voice quickly suppressed all the whispers and sounded in the auction hall, "Jeffrey, I request that the auction be suspended. I need to discuss with my team." Everyone turned their heads and found that the speaker was Sam Lei-Sherdong, the CEO of Viacom. Katzenberg did not refuse and said with a smile, "Of course, Mr. Lei-Sherdong. Then, the auction will be delayed for half an hour. If anyone needs to discuss urgently, feel free to do so." Chapter 658. Eric sat in the back row of the auction hall, quietly watching the teams of several major companies participating in the auction. The sudden announcement of the extension of the payment time for the purchase of the animation department was also the result of careful consideration by the senior management of Firefly. In order to ensure that no Hollywood forces would come forward to cause trouble in the process of acquiring Marvel, Eric kept the animation department up for more than a month. During this month, the buyers who were interested in acquiring the animation department must have discussed and evaluated the business many times. The major film companies should have calmed down from the initial surprise and excitement of Firefly's decision to sell the animation department. They should have determined the upper limit of the final offer based on their financial situation in detail. The possibility of collusion between the various companies could not even be ruled out. Firefly suddenly announced the extension of the payment period from 1 year to 3 years, leaving the final buyer with plenty of time to raise funds and pay. This could easily break the established bidding strategy of potential buyers. After all, Disney's animation department was too tempting for several major companies who wanted to enter the animation film market, especially now that the box office of The Lion King was rising steadily. Of course, this kind of sudden attack with obvious intentions would definitely be criticized by the buyers. However, the preferential conditions given by Firefly gave the buyers no reason to refuse. Almost everyone in the hall left. Katzenberg walked to the podium and sat down next to Eric. He asked excitedly and expectantly, "Eric, how much do you think we can get this time?" Eric said, "It can definitely exceed $2 billion US. A few days ago, the big stars boycotted the studio's act of reducing their pay. This should give them some inspiration and raise the price a little higher. After all, not only can animated movies bring more revenue than live-action movies, but the characters in them won't ask for as high a salary as the big stars. It can also reduce their dependence on live-action movies." Frank Wales, who was sitting on the other side of Eric, also asked, "Eric, in this case, do you think it can reach $3 billion US? "That's unlikely." Eric shook his head. In his memory, the market value of Pixar animation in the original space-time immediately soared to $1 billion US after the success of Toy Story. However, the technological difference between hand-drawn animation and computer animation also limited the value of Disney's animation department. Unless we expand the scope of copyright authorization for several animations such as The Lion King, or even completely transfer the copyright, but Disneyland and Disney stores need the copyright of these animated characters. We can't do that. As they chatted casually, the auction team that had just left gradually returned to the hall. Half an hour later, Katzenberg returned to the stage. After saying a few words to liven up the atmosphere, Katzenberg picked up the gavel and loudly announced the start of the auction. Then, the hall was silent for a moment. It seemed that no one intended to make a move immediately. After a few seconds of stalemate, a middle-aged man sitting in the third row raised his number for the first time. $1 billion USD. Eric looked over. The person who raised his number was the president of MGM, John Carey. He shook his head and smiled. He knew that MGM was just here to join in the fun. Of course, John Carey raising his number first must have some unrealistic fantasies. For example, if the gavel in Katzenberg's hand suddenly fell while the other buyers were hesitant, MGM would definitely happily snatch the animation department with $1 billion US. Even if MGM had not fully recovered, Eric believed that MGM shareholders and creditors would not be stingy with this $1 billion US. Of course, the reality was that this was impossible. Number 9, $1 billion US. Katzenberg gestured in John Carey's direction. Before he had time to say more, another bidder had already raised his number. $1 billion and $10 million. The minimum increase in this auction was $10 million US. Although the second bidder only cautiously added $10 million US, the competitive atmosphere began to become more and more intense. The auction price began to rise like a hot knife through butter. 1. 3 billion, 1. 5 billion, 1. 7 billion, 1. 9 billion. The auction went on for less than 10 minutes. More than half of the potential buyers in the auction hall had been eliminated after Sam Redstone personally called out the price of $9 billion US. Only Paramount, Fox, Warner, and the Seagram Group that was about to buy Universal were still active. After an obvious hesitation on the price of $9 billion US, Joe Ross, the president of Fox, raised his number plate. $2 billion US. Number 4, from 20th Century Fox Film Company, $2 billion US. Katzenberg's voice on the auction stage rose again. It was full of bewitchment. What I want to say is that just The Lion King alone can bring a net profit of $1 billion US for the film company. Therefore, $2 billion US only represents the net profit of 2 The Lion King movies. I believe that Disney's animation department, an excellent team with half a century of experience, will produce a second, third, or even more The Lion King. Then, $2 billion US, going once. Eric listened to Kaysenberg's extravagant words and looked in the direction of Fox's team. Under Eric's suggestion, Elizabeth obviously did not participate in this matter. Also, for some reason, Murdoch did not appear either. The only person who led Fox to the auction was the president, Joe Ross. Speaking of which, Home Alone, in the original Spacetime, was produced by Joe Ross and distributed by Fox. Joe Ross should have been headhunted to Disney with a high salary because of the outstanding box office of Home Alone. He also served as the president of Disney for a short time before Frank Wells died unexpectedly in the original Spacetime and Michael Ovitz took over. However, because of Eric's appearance in this Spacetime, Joe Ross still maintained a cooperative relationship with Fox. In the personnel changes after Barry Diller left Fox, he got the position of president of 20th Century Fox. As for the CEO of Fox, Rupert Murdoch personally served as the president. Since Murdoch did not appear in person, after Firefly suddenly played the card of extending the payment deadline, Fox was almost certain to be eliminated. After all, compared to Sam Redstone's aggressiveness, Murdoch was much more conservative. $2 billion US was likely to be Fox's last bid. After the price rose to $2 billion US, the frequency of the offstage bidding slowed down a lot. Most of the time, almost at the moment when Kaysenberg's gavel fell, the offstage would make a bid. After a few more rounds of bidding, after Fox, Seagram's CEO, Edgar Bronfman, also chose to be eliminated at the price of $2 billion US. In the end, there were only two competitors left, Paramount and Time Warner. This result was not out of Eric's expectations. Buying Universal was Seagram's first priority. If they bought Disney's animation department at a high price before buying Universal, it would mean that Seagram's bargaining chip to buy Universal would be reduced. If they bought the animation department at a high price but failed to buy Universal, then Edgar Bronfman would cry but have no tears. In the hall, Time Warner's CEO, Terry Semel, once again called out a price of $33 billion US. However, Eric could hear that compared to Sam Redstone, who was still full of fighting spirit, Terry Semel was not as full of energy. "It seems that the result is very obvious," Frank Wales whispered beside Eric. Eric nodded slightly. Listening to Sam Redstone's quick bid, he said, "Compared to Sam Redstone, Terry Semel is constrained too much. Only someone like Steve Ross can completely control Time Warner. Moreover, the situation within Time Warner that there are many factions is almost single-handedly caused by Steve Ross. Unless there is another popular manager, Time Warner will not be able to stabilize for a long time in the future." Frank Wales had worked at Time Warner for many years. He nodded in agreement, but then shook his head slightly and said, "The popular manager you mentioned is not likely to appear. Within Time Warner system, the leaders of Time Warner Communications, Turner Broadcasting, Time Publishing, and Warner Brothers Entertainment are all very powerful in their respective fields. They will not acknowledge a new manager, and will not be willing to let another person occupy the high position of Time Warner's CEO. Only a powerful person like Steve Ross, who single-handedly created Time Warner, can make them bow down to him. Unfortunately, Ross passed away too early. Steve Ross, Warren Buffett, Sam Redstone, and Rupert Murdoch were similar in age. They were all in their 60s. Compared to a group of old men who were still alive and kicking after 20 years, Steve Ross, the media hero who created Time Warner, had indeed passed away too early. Eric looked at Terry Semel, who had once again fallen into hesitation after Sam Redstone's bid, and said, "If I were a shareholder of Time Warner, since everyone can't work together, I would rather choose to break up the group. Otherwise, such a long period of internal friction will only cause the overall strength of Time Warner to decline." In the memory of his previous life, Time Warner eventually walked down the path of non-stop business splitting, but this media giant made this decision too late. In the end, before Eric's rebirth, the market value of Time Warner, which was originally neck and neck with the Disney Group, was only about $50 billion, not even a third of its peak. During the same period, the Disney Group's market value was close to $200 billion USD. Frank Wales said regretfully, "Now everyone thinks that the bigger the group, the better. It's not easy for Time Warner to coexist peacefully, but it's also not easy for them to go their separate ways. Eric, if Firefly becomes too bloated in the future, will you be willing to break up the group? Eric smiled and pointed at Katzenberg on the stage. Am I not doing that now? Frank Wales nodded in realization, and said, I actually neglected this matter. The two chatted softly, and the auction in the venue entered the final stage. Eric clearly heard Terry Semmel's voice tremble as he called out the price of $410 billion. He raised his head and looked at Terry Semmel's back. Eric's gaze locked on Terry Semmel did not have time to move away. With only a short moment of hesitation, Sam Redstone raised the number in his hand and shouted loudly, $5 billion. Terry Semmel's shoulders visibly slumped. On the stage, Katzenberg said a few more words, and after counting to 3, Terry Semmel did not move to raise the number again, so he put down the gavel in his hand. Katzenberg raised his voice and said, Congratulations, Mr. Sam Redstone, Paramount Pictures will obtain Disney's animation department. Amidst the gradual applause, everyone in the venue stood up, and many people even walked towards Sam Redstone and the others. Eric also walked over with Frank Wales and the others, enthusiastically congratulating them. The follow-up formal signing would only be carried out after Paramount confirmed the detailed contract and the list of assets of the animation department. Therefore, after a short press conference, Firefly invited all the guests who participated in the auction to another hall of the Hilton Hotel. They each held a glass of champagne and socialized in the venue. Eric and Katzenberg went to a corner with fewer people. The final price is at least $300 million higher than we expected. Katzenberg's expression was still excited. It seems that today's measures to extend the payment period really worked. From Terry Semmel's reaction at the scene, Time Warner's original upper limit should be about $2 billion. After $2 billion, Terry Semmel's expression was obviously not as calm as before. Although Sam Redstone's reaction didn't change much, I guess his initial base price should also be about $2 billion. Let's not talk about this. Eric also had a smile on his face as he said, On your side, how are the preparations for the new Disney animation department going? I haven't seen any related documents in the past few days. Katzenberg replied, I plan to sponsor a digital animation production major at the California Institute of the Arts in Los Angeles and the San Francisco Art Institute in San Francisco. It will be divided into a half-year short-term training class and a 2-year standard professional class. The short-term training class will mainly recruit people from existing software or advertising companies. It will mainly recruit people with computer and drawing skills, as well as accumulated work experience and professional software training. This way, we can set up the new Disney animation department as soon as possible. However, this method requires more investment. For long-term consideration, we still need to rely on the 2-year training to provide us with more professional digital animation talents. Currently, I'm asking the strategic planning department to do the relevant budget. You will see the relevant report at the end of the month. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.